This is All Things Considered, and I'm Noah Kulwin. 20 years ago this week, the rock band Radiohead released what many consider their magnum opus Kid A. Ex-girlfriends whined to our correspondent about why it sucked. On Capitol Hill, leading physicians testified that the coronavirus pandemic is far from over. Leaders at the CDC stressed that the American people must not be, quote, bitch-made, and that it's our duty to try and tough it out. And finally, some good news from a research clinic in California. Scientists are saying that they've made a world historical breakthrough. That's right, they found a cure for racism. This is Noah Kulwin, and you're listening to All Things Considered on NPR. Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein.
Brace, that's the first intro we haven't done together.
I know, it feels a little... I just feel a little funky. I think to rectify this crazy feeling that I have, I think we should do like a 35-minute UCB style like improv routine about bananas.
Yes, and
I don't know, man. I was gonna do like a UCB joke, and I couldn't remember what the phrase they say.
That's what they say. Yes, and
I have. Do you have I have zero interest in improv.
Yeah, I'm good.
I lived with two improv people.
No,
and I'll tell
did
you
you?
what. Yes, they got really mad at me for stealing all their silver spoons and using them to shoot junk with. But they were awful. They were always in the living room. Well, I don't like that. Listen, if you live with other people, you got to ration your living. You can't be a guy that's just always in the living room.
I think that's very true.
You know? Because then it's kind of becomes your space. No, man, I want to get caught jerking off there too.
Oh my God. Anyway, hello, welcome. This is TrueAnon.
Hi, my name is Brace.
I'm Liz.
We are joined by Young Chomsky, who's our producer. I did that weird. Keep going, Liz.
So we have a kind of wild episode. I don't know what to say. We had a plan for this episode. We had a plan. We had our notes. We were ready to go. And it kind of went off the rails.
Yeah, a phrase I came up with in 2012 to describe an unfortunate encounter I had with several men on the street is no plan survives contact with the enemy. Not that Noah is the enemy, but Palantir, in fact, podcasting is my enemy. And so our plan went off the rails, but I liked it.
Yeah, it was fun. So we've got a wide-ranging conversation for you guys with our old friend Noah Kulwin. Mm-hmm. Who, this is third time's the charm on his appearance on TrueAnon. And we're talking freaky deaky shit, you guys. Let's do it.
Well, we got fucking Noah here again.
That's good.
I didn't ask to be here, man.
Hey, not my pride. Listen, baby. Every few days, I show up to the Google Meet, and somebody else is here. Maybe it's just Liz. I don't know. I just go with it. You don't think I read the notes for this kind of shit? I don't know. Well, we got Noah. What the fuck are we talking about today?
No, we should say welcome. Brace gave the game away. We have Noah Kulwin here today. Noah, how should we introduce you? Why don't you introduce yourself?
We usually do this before we record. Wait, let me try this. Noah is some position, I can't remember if it's editor or not, at Jewish Currents, or he's not anymore. Okay, he's nodding. And he's also the co-host of the very famous and rival podcast, Blowback podcast, about the Iraq War, the second war.
Yes, Iraq War the two. That's about right. I mean, the particulars really don't matter. They're sort of irrelevant.
Our most
what matters is that
guest.
I'm here.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Not
this is third time, right?
Yeah,
this is
I'm
like
a
fourth
three-peat.
or fifth time.
I'm here for the three-peat. 4 and 5, inshallah, to quote Joe Biden, will happen.
And to quote LeBron, 6, 7, we don't know what's going to happen.
We have brought Noah here to the Hedonism 2 to talk about one of my biggest, greatest, worst, and twink-lovinest enemies.
Peter Thiel and Palantir.
Yes. If people don't know, Palantir is recently in the news because they recently went public. They filed an IPO. They opened, I think it was on Wednesday of this week. They opened at the stock exchange. I think they opened at like $10 a share. And so Palantir is famous for being this basically kind of like shadowy Silicon Valley tech company. I feel like they kind of operate based on like people not knowing what they're doing. It's sort of like in casual conversation, it's like everyone agrees that Palantir is very scary, but no one really knows what they do. Kind of like a smaller scale, like BlackRock in terms of like their like the space they mentally occupy. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I mean, I think of it as like Palantir is a surveillance company, and a really good surveillance company, by definition, is one that doesn't share a lot of details about how it conducts surveillance, for whom it conducts surveillance, and on whom it does. And so I think that those sorts of, like, the nature of its business is pretty fundamentally opaque. And even when that kind of company goes public, which refers to the act of making public its financial information, we still don't get a really complete idea of what Palantir does and for whom.
Yeah, so we are really happy to have you on because you actually are very well versed in a lot of the ins and outs of Silicon Valley and the tech industry. And so I think today we're going to kind of go into some of these things about what we know about Palantir, what we don't know about Palantir, a little bit of history there, and then kind of like who is Peter Thiel, right? Because this is another person who operates in a lot of spheres, whether political or in technology or in science or even in academia, as we'll see, and is a bit of a shadowy figure himself. A lot of people know who he is, but don't really know what he's about. And I think we all got a lot to say about this guy.
Well, I think with Palantir and Thiel, I think the impression that most people have of that guy and that organization is A, Palantir spies on you and works with ICE, and B, Peter Thiel drinks the blood of young people and shut down Gawker. And that's like basically the two main things that people know. And so, yeah, I think it's pretty important we get into what this company actually fucking does.
Right. I mean, to give, a bit of sort of like the brief, like by the facts sort of description of Palantir. Palantir was founded in 2003, and 2004 it sort of really gets going. And it was created by Peter Thiel, who by that point had made his millions into billions by co-creating PayPal. And through his investment fund, the Founders Fund, and working with other former colleagues from what are called like the PayPal Mafia, Elon Musk is a member of this. That's actually like the nickname the moniker that they chose to go by.
That is so fucking corny.
I think it's really cool, but whatever. So like the PayPal Mafia launches Palantir in the mid 2000s, and you can already sort of conjure the environment mentally of what 2003, 2004 was like. We were preparing to invade Iraq. The surveillance state, as we understand it today, was being, built brick by brick. In even more aggressive form with the passage of the Patriot Act just a few years earlier. And I think Palantir can sort of rightfully be viewed as kind of a specifically Silicon Valley based kind of intervention into that sort of like emerging space. Mm-hmm. And the central idea of it is, you can kind of suss it out from its name. The Palantir in The Lord of the Rings is the all-seeing orb eye thing that in the movies gets one of the hobbits into trouble. I don't remember the plot details that specifically, but what I do remember is that Tolkien specifically introduced the Palantir as an example of like a piece of technology or magic or whatever that corrupt all who used it. So naturally, Peter Thiel unironically and literally lifts it as the name of the company. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
I've literally never read or seen Lord of the Rings.
I mean, it's entertaining. The movies suck, but the
I tried to watch the movie and I couldn't get over that Elijah Wood's neck is the same width as his face.
So
And
it's
I
just
don't
like-
understand why the little men are so small, but there's other guys that are like normal height.
crossbreeding.
Oh, yeah. Well, we won't get into that here.
Yeah, it's the so like the Palantir like sort of it's in the late 2000s and the early 2010s when it starts to raise really substantial amounts of money from private investors, including In-Q-Tel, which is the CIA's private venture capital firm. That it starts to draw a lot of attention because it's also around this time with the proliferation of technologies like cloud computing and smartphones that the actual applications of Palantir, like the kind of fantasy that it conjures can be realized. And what that fantasy is basically creating a piece of software or a tool that can synthesize a lot of different strands of data, that can take a lot of different complicated inputs and make them more easily accessible to Palantir's clients.
One thing that I found notable about the In-Q-Tel thing is, first of all, I knew that the CIA had like a venture capital firm before, but I didn't know that at the time that they acquired or that they invested in Palantir, rather, it was basically being run by the guy that brought Tetris over to America.
Yeah. I mean, the creation of In-Q-Tel is a funny story on its own, and there's actually been a lot of like writing done about it. But I think it's also like it's sort of as like shorthand. It's really useful to look at In-Q-Tel and the kind of stuff that it invests in as sort of like reflective of the ambient interest of the security state and the kinds of technologies it wants to invest in, as well as the actual individual people that it wants to support. Which I guess is a good way of talking about the very weird fucking guy who's the actual CEO of Palantir, Alex Karp, who ultimately answers to Peter Thiel.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Alex Karp is a real character. It's weird because he got a lot of like very weird press for basically calling himself a socialist and being this sort of like trying to position himself as a kind of foil to Peter Thiel, like who's obviously notoriously very conservative libertarian. And it doesn't seem to be the case, like at all with Alex Karp.
Well, Karp got his start writing for Jacobin, if I'm not mistaken, and did like some book on the Civil War or whatever.
Yeah. He just got tenured at Princeton, I think.
Exactly.
Yeah,
So I was surprised to see him. No, Alex Karp is, I think a good way of looking at this is that like he doesn't come from like a technological background. He comes from like a philosophy background in school wise, at least, which I think leads, no disrespect. Listen, I'm literally closing my eyes, drawing my hands together in prayer right now. Well, in like the prayer shape, I'm actually praying and saying, any philosophy graduates out there, whatever you are, I see you, I hear you, you're valid. I will think it's weird when you do head up a surveillance company. I don't like that. You should just do what you're supposed to do and just get a job at like a fancy coffee shop. But yeah, he did that whole like series of interviews about being like socialist and like didn't really elaborate on what that means, but like to be honest, his politics aren't like too different from Tony Blair's, I'm sure. Or most parties in like the Socialist International. And he one thing I did discover, he is a very unlikable man even from afar. Like watching videos of this man speak, you get this like sort of like reserve of rage that you didn't know was in you, and it comes to the fore, and like you start doing the whole Elvis Gun TV thing, and like it's incredible. And apparently he doesn't just rub me the wrong way, he rubs like actual other policemen the wrong way too.
Right. I mean, Palantir has had a notoriously difficult time throughout its lifetime for in maintaining contracts with its clients. It's been like, sort of a number of years ago, starting with Will Alden, then at BuzzFeed News, wrote a bunch of stories about how Palantir struggled to keep corporate clients, and some of it, and especially in the law enforcement world, a lot of it's chalked up to the fact that Alex Karp is this like total weirdo. I mean, he claims to have like studied theory with like Jürgen Habermas, which Moira
that's
Weigel,
apparently not true.
Yeah,
by
she
the way.
she debunked that. And
Who's that? Who's Jürgen Habermas?
Porn star? I don't know.
Okay.
No, he's a European continental political theorist.
Okay, lame.
Yeah, but I think that like he's always tried to cut this sort of like I mean, there's a certain kind of like figure that he sort of like an archetype that he resembles in Silicon Valley, which is like the philosopher king CEO. I think the most like easily compared example would be when you look at Mark Zuckerberg during the years of like, you know, Facebook's like biggest growth, unchallenged growth before it really entered public scrutiny. There was this whole sort of idea that he tried to advance about how Facebook was connecting the world. And that was why Facebook was offering free basics in India and why it would beam internet from balloons. And like that, obviously the trade-off with that is that you give them data and information, but that Facebook would be, you know, almost like this utility. And there was like a real, you know, like there was like an intellectual and ideological component to it. And obviously that was sort of subordinate always to whatever is the thing that makes Facebook most money. But I think that like that image and that idea is something that is, you know, like in the toolkit of Silicon Valley companies, it's something that's very, very useful for both raising money, for articulating a vision of how these companies can perform on the open market once they do go public, and for generally trying to give, you know, a sort of like straightforward coherence to these companies, like, you know, imagined conceptions of themselves. Because it's also a way for Palantir to humanize its vision, to launder it through this weirdo CEO, to be able to, you know, say that like we're not in the because as Palantir does this, they literally say this, that we're not in the business of like soaking up your data like Facebook and those other bad companies. Instead, we're working with ICE, and it's a way to try and hide those contradictions.
That's something that's so common in well, it's I guess just in all over the business world, but it becomes like really comical when you look at it with Silicon Valley, is that all these companies present this like sort of grand, all-encompassing, sometimes like totalizing vision of like their mission and the things they're going to do. And like, yeah, like you're saying, like Facebook was become this world-changing force for good, or like Google. I mean, a lot of it revolves, of course, around connectivity. But like what it really is just like different ways of saying like, we are taking your data, we are ruining your life, and we're like smiling as we do it, and we're making a ton of money. Or we're not making any money at all because it's all about the mission.
Yeah, I want to for a second read something that Karp. I keep wanting to say Matt Karp. I feel so bad. I'm sorry, Matt, if you're listening to this.
Yeah, Matt, we apologize for this, but it's your last name, so it's kind of your fault and your problem. Just fucking own it, okay?
Pick a different fish.
So,
there are like 5 other Jewish last names you could pick from. That'd be fine. Like, let's be real.
Okay. So Alex Karp wrote a letter to investors because Palantir announced that it was moving out of Silicon Valley. And this was a big, this was a big earthquake in Silicon Valley because Noah's kind of laid out is that Palantir was a very early, I mean, I don't want to say early adopter, but they were like an early, Thiel and Palantir were like an early pillar of the like Silicon Valley landscape and ethos and kind of really exemplifying that kind of mystery and ambition, like you say, right? So them making a big point about they're moving all of their offices to Denver, Colorado, which I want to put I want to put a pin in that because I want to come back to Colorado a little bit after this. But I want to read from the letter that he wrote because it kind of gets at what we're talking about. He says, the engineering elite of Silicon Valley may know more than most about building software, but they do not know more about how society should be organized or what justice requires. Our company was founded in Silicon Valley, but we seem to share fewer and fewer of the technology sector's values and commitments. Software projects with our nation's defense and intelligence agencies, whose missions are to keep us safe. Okay. Have become controversial, while companies built on advertising dollars are commonplace. For many consumer internet companies, our thoughts and inclinations, behaviors, and browsing habits are the product for sale. The slogans and marketing of many of the Valley's largest technology firms attempt to obscure the simple fact. So he's obviously calling out Facebook and Google. Well, Google specifically right there.
There are 2 things I would want to sort of stress there. The first of which is that Peter Thiel, who is, the on the board and ultimately the chairman of Palantir, the most important figure in terms of running the show, is also one of the handful of people on the board of Facebook.
Yes.
And so
he's sort of like known as like the loyal opposition on the board, right? Because he's like the anti-globalist.
I mean, I think that he's like a really Peter Thiel's a venerated guy, and he Zuckerberg and those people, they take him literally and seriously, to put it
Plus,
well.
he adds diversity by being gay.
I mean, for those circles, perhaps, or not so much, actually. But I do think, and also when you say that, like, the defense and intelligence agencies bit there, I do think that, like, there's another. It's worth pointing out that, like, Palantir is not the only. It's not even the only company with a Lord of the Rings inspired or like a fantasy name funded by Peter Thiel that like deals with national security stuff. Palmer Luckey, the meme lord who co-founded Oculus VR, his company Anduril makes like advanced like drones and like border patrol kind of technology, for example, is also funded by Peter Thiel and invested in this. So there's like a kind of mission statement that Karp is making here. That I think is also sort of like a blueprint for other companies that might want to follow in his footstep, because obviously, government contracts and government and defense procurement is an incredibly lucrative business, and trying to articulate some sort of like position of moral supremacy that you can while taking those is sort of critical to being able to, withstand the public pressure that these companies naturally face by helping out people like ICE.
Well, and securing a position against Google and Facebook, right? Even while like maintaining all of those relationships, all of it, it's all marketeering, right? It doesn't fucking matter. But kind of I think positioning themselves against Google and Facebook, who, by the way, right now are facing a lot of congressional scrutiny, right? As platforms, specifically, with all the like fake news shit that all of Congress is worried about, in the way that Facebook gets away with not moderating comments or whatever through maintaining publisher status. Like, they're getting a lot of scrutiny there. They're getting a lot of scrutiny as monopolies. They're getting a lot of scrutiny for business practices, etc. So it makes sense for on a couple levels for Palantir as they're going public. Remember, so they're trying to get share prices up and, get people to invest in the company in that way. And they're trying to get more contracts, which we're going to get into. It makes sense for them to then create this little market niche for themselves against these companies, both philosophically and now physically away from Silicon Valley.
Well, with Google in particular, I'm sure some listeners remember the protests at Google over their involvement in Project Maven, and they later, I think they just let the contract expire, and Palantir actually took that over. That was like an AI. I'm too stupid to fucking understand what most of this is. I just know it's all bad because, well, it's called something called Project something, and Google and both Palantir involved. But it was like AI software for the military, and Palantir gladly took that over. There's also the case of Thiel writing in the New York Times, the failing New York Times, an op-ed asking why it's okay for, how come Google gets to go to China and work with China on AI, which is sensitive national security stuff, or potentially, whereas like Google employees, talk about how working with the US military is wrong. And like, he has a point there, because like, Google's technology is evil. It doesn't matter if all of this technology is evil.
All technology is evil.
But like, it's like, he was obviously like, that was a very pointed op-ed he wrote there, because even though Google was just working with the civilian sector in China, he was positioning that as like, well, you don't know where the technology is going. And that kind of plays into like Palantir's whole like national security mythos. And of course, being part of that sort of conglomeration now means that you're an anti-China hawk.
And there's a nice sort of, like, I think kind of simpatico intellectual ideological component to that with Thiel specifically, because Thiel's sort of most well-known, I guess, like if you could call it like an intellectual contribution to Silicon Valley. It's sort of like the central principle of his book, which is 0 to 1, which is that like monopolies are good. And the way for the aspiration of every startup should be to completely dominate whatever market it's in. And if you look at companies like Google, like Amazon, like even Uber, which loses money, the thing that they all have in common, and that this sort of iteration of Silicon Valley has in common, is that these are all companies that are completely trying to dominate and own the markets in which they operate. And that's, I would stress that that's not like a particularly novel insight, that the larger market share you have, the more profit you have. But it's sort of one of these things where it's like, well, why is it that Google is like literally one of the most like 3 or 4 most like valuable companies in the world? And it's because it was fusing like developments in software, and the fact that software got better and better and cheaper, with that sort of thinking about like total market domination. And like, government and defense contracting is some of the most, you're talking about like tens of millions of dollars are the smallest contracts that Palantir and other companies are bidding for in some cases. And so if you're completely dominating government procurement for one small piece of it, then you're going to make a whole lot of fucking money. And part of the way that you do that, and part of the way that you frame this, is by saying, look, our competitors, they're compromised on security. You can't trust them. And by the way, we're also the bleeding edge. We're the people who are doing all of the most high-end stuff. And it's that last point that on perhaps which Palantir is getting into a little bit of trouble.
Well, before we get into exactly, we've kind of teased what they do, but we should get into exactly what they do and what the kind of, if you can call it innovation that they're providing. But I do want to I want to circle back. We're talking about tech, so I can say circle back, I guess. I want to circle back to something that Brace mentioned, which was the China positioning.
And we got to synergize that.
Yeah. I do think it's very interesting given that, I don't know if our listeners have been paying attention to the election, but obviously, like, the anti-China rhetoric from both Joe Biden and Donald Trump is reaching, like, kind of
China!
Comical levels.
I have, whenever anyone says China now, I just hear Trump going, China, in my head.
Thank you for explaining that, because just interjecting that, I was very confused.
Yeah, well, he hyphenates it, which I think is really like, I don't know. That's very streamlined and synergistic to me.
Yeah, but it seems like regardless of who wins the election, that China hawks are within the Pentagon and State Department and God knows where else are, their stock is up, we'll say.
Absolutely.
And so for Thiel Thiel being a very obvious or very blatant and public, critic of China and their relationship with these Silicon Valley companies, which again, he's positioning himself against, makes sense for him trying to secure more and more defense contracts, right? Because if he's ideologically aligned, he's buddies, easier to get. So let's get into it. Okay, so we've said that they're a surveillance company. We've said that they gather data. Again, like we said at the beginning of the episode, this is a company that, people kind of have an idea of what they do, but no one really does. And looking into it gets complicated and confusing. So let's break down exactly what Palantir does.
So I guess the sort of simplest way to understand Palantir is from the perspective of one of its clients. So Palantir only has about 125 clients. I think I read that in a Bloomberg article. And that means that it mainly works with extremely large corporations or the government. And the government, that can mean large federal agencies or police departments. And so let's say you are the Los Angeles Police Department. You probably have ShotSpotter technology, which are highly advanced, highly sensitive microphones trained to recognize and geolocate gunshots and report them.
Although to be fair with those, they do sometimes actually quite often, at least in San Francisco, the technology does not necessarily recognize, or it recognizes things that aren't gunshots, but loud, sharp noises.
Like cars backfiring. And in one case in Connecticut, almost a decade ago, I believe, there was actually a case where ShotSpotter recording something somebody said was prosecutors wanted to use in a trial. So obviously there's insane creep with all this stuff. And so ShotSpotter is one example, or the proximity of parking tickets on a block or something. But basically just all of the random bits of what we would call data that that these kinds of entities collect. And the whole idea of Palantir, the most high level dream, is that Palantir synthesizes all of that data using its proprietary algorithms and technology and Russian dressing or whatever, and it it funnels it into a single usable piece of software, like a console that people at its client companies can access and use, and that through that, like, they can understand, like, draw connections and understand, what that data may tell them. And that is, like, ideally how it works. But, like, in reality, it's a little bit more complicated.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like, there was a great article that just came out in New York Magazine called Inside Palantir, or no, it's called Techie Software Soldier Spy, which is very cute.
That is really, I love that.
Also, great, as much as I shouldn't be, huge John Le Carre fan. Also,
no, he's incredible. He's
great. That
the
movie is great.
The movie is fine. No. The thing to watch is the 1979 the BBC miniseries.
No, the BBC one. That's the one I'm talking about.
Yeah, also, it's Smiley's perfect. People.
It's great.
Yeah. Oh my God,
dad had that
so
on
good.
DVD when I was here. It's
I guess for the people listening, Alec Guinness, who played Obi-Wan Kenobi, he plays George Smiley. This is a far superior role because Star Wars is a children's movie, and this is grown-up entertainment. But I highly suggest that you watch it. It's on YouTube, all for free. It's free. It's free.
It's excellent.
You have no excuse.
Also, if you are maybe doing guard duty in Syria and like you think it's going to be a quiet night, it is okay for you to put your kefi kind of like up towards your ears and with one headphone listen to the BBC radio play of the Dishonorable Schoolboy. It's okay to do that.
That's actually the Honorable Schoolboy, but whatever.
The Honorable Schoolboy.
Sorry, some of us just know more. That's just how it is.
It's actually funny because he actually wrote Dishonorable Schoolboy, but it's only in manuscript, and only if your podcast is really good will he give it to you. So maybe you didn't get it, Noah. I'm sorry, that felt mean. I really like it.
Okay. So it's in New York Magazine last week. It's called Techie Software Soldier Spy by Sharon Weinberger. And it's a really incredible, I mean, we'll link to it. It's a really, really well-reported piece and a lot of really great quotes.
It's good, yeah.
Yeah, it's a great read. But basically what it seems like is that, as you say, that's, Noah kind of outlined what the dream of Palantir is, right? Synthesizing all of this data for, imagining the possibilities of what these, either, like we said, corporations or more likely, government agencies, how they can then use and harvest this data. But it, from what has been detailed in this piece, it seems like what they're tripping up with is the fact that Palantir has a very glossy interface, but it's almost impossible to read this amount of data in any kind of like real way, in any meaningful way.
Well, certainly machines can't do it because part of the appeal of Palantir is that like it's giving you this technology, and sort of the implicit and I think explicit promise with that is that this technology will do the bulk of the legwork and actually kind of just figure it out for you. Whereas, like, it's like with all these technology companies, and specifically, like, Theranos comes to mind here, also a national security connected company in the case of Mad Dog Mattis being on the board there. It doesn't actually really work without, let's say, a certain amount of human involvement. That's pretty difficult to do.
And that's sort of like a really essential thing here, which is like, why is it that like Google and Facebook have like these incredible valuations and turn out like, billions in profits every year? And it's because like they have like using a relatively small number of engineers and executives and so on, who are all paid really highly, on top of obviously a contract labor force that is largely unseen. They have been able to, create something to make you using software that can, generate and replace what was previously done as the labor of many, many more thousands of people. Like, for just by way of example with Facebook, because I think that's especially often a tough one to talk about with this stuff. It's just hard to think through. Like, think about how there used to be all these like, classified sections and ad agencies and all of these specific things that you had to do in order to show an ad to the people you wanted to show it to. And Facebook literally just destroyed them, and Google obviously in the same way with search advertising. And so in Palantir's case, they're saying, listen, all of those analysts that you used to have to pay or that you might otherwise pay, or we're offering something that can take the place of those. But the trouble that Palantir has is that, as Brace was saying, like, we'll often with this technology and like this, where phrases like artificial intelligence get thrown around, how much is AI and how much is actually just a very highly paid human being like pushing buttons and giving advice is, like how much is which, and what then actually is the value add that Palantir provides. And that, is sort of like the question. I think like Wall Street, for example, is fairly agnostic on that question. Ever since Palantir, it's been a day since Palantir went public as we're recording this, and their stock hasn't really gone up or down. I think that there's a lot of people who are holding their breath on seeing whether or not Palantir could actually ever turn realize the value proposition, which is kind of insane for a company that's, worth $21 billion on the open market.
Well, I just want to point out one of the quotes that I just find it was just incredible in this piece in New York Magazine is from, former CIA official. And he's talking about, the problems that exactly you're laying out that they run into with this incredible technology and what it means for, the labor they have to hire then to handle it. And he says, the moment you introduce an expensive IT engineer into the process, you've cut your profits. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is the clearest distilled definition of the tendency of the rate of profit to fall. This is exactly a perfect distillation of that. And that's the hard limit that all of these tech companies run into, right?
Yeah, I mean, Uber is like the great classic example of like where this is becoming a problem, because Uber has never made a profit, and it's incredibly difficult to see how they, or even like Lyft or its competitors, could do the same. And it's also, it's also dislodging what were previously profitable companies. I mean, take Grubhub, for example. Grubhub existed, was on Wall Street, traded, and turned nice profits, and everything small, but what was a real viable company. But then all of a sudden, all of these companies that were committed to hemorrhaging money, like DoorDash and Uber Eats, as a division of Uber, they start getting in the space and they start just burning cash and setting on fire in an effort to gain as much market share as possible. And naturally, profits fall for everybody, because it turns out that the innovations that they were relying on, like self-driving cars, weren't coming quickly enough. And even with demolishing labor laws around the country to employ drivers, they still haven't been able to actually make the numbers work. And that's, dynamically, that is the same challenge that Palantir now faces.
Yeah, I mean, another example with Uber, and I always think about this with the self-driving car thing, is that I remember years and years ago, they were testing self-driving cars in San Jose. And the problem that they were doing really well in San Jose, right? Because San Jose has a lot of tax revenue, so they have great roads. And the roads are like very well maintained, good traffic lights, good lanes, easily demarcated, et cetera, right? Then they started testing the self-driving cars out in places not in Silicon Valley that don't have a lot of tax revenue, where the roads are really messed up. And what they realized was the self-driving cars could not recognize lanes or like broken stoplights or anything that was like broken infrastructure, which, by the way, is basically most of America. And so none of this technology would work or would be applicable without massive investments in public infrastructure in order to bring all of it up to speed, right?
Well, our good friend Trump has got that infrastructure bill coming any day.
Yeah, it's infrastructure week again.
I mean, exactly. As a story to relate, like one of the 3 years ago when I was covering Silicon Valley for Vice News, I went to Uber's like autonomous driving headquarters in Pittsburgh, and they put on the show for all these journalists where, we rode around in the cars. And the explanation that they gave for why they were centering their operations in Pittsburgh, beyond the fact that they just raided the faculty department at Carnegie Mellon, was that they were like, look, Pittsburgh is like totally like it's like topographically like, it has all of the risks, like it's uneven streets, lots of hills, super windy, it's crumbling, it's a piece of shit, like the whole city's falling apart, it's perfect for experimentation. And then it turns out, like, it came out in court proceedings during the Anthony Lewandowski Google Uber lawsuit, that the whole like thing, like that experience, that ride that I'd been given in a self-driving car was actually just like manufactured, that it was for show. And so like
they pre-planned the route or something?
Yeah. Like it was all incredible. Like it was and so there's like always like embedded and enmeshed in these companies is, I think, like within the culture of a lot of these companies, is like a fake it till you make it kind of thing with a lot of this technology. And it's just so wrapped up in how they think and approach these issues.
one small anecdote about self-driving cars that I was told by a journalist who might have been there at that Carnegie Mellon bullshit or whatever you went to, because he was covering self-driving cars for a big story in a major magazine, and he told me that this was about 3 years ago. He said that this was right around the time that one of these companies, it was either Google or Uber, I can't remember which, one of their cars hit somebody and like pretty badly injured them on a city street. And that employees at the other company, which is, again, it's either Google or Uber, I can't remember, were like privately furious because they had wanted to draw first blood.
That makes total sense. Like Uber, I mean, Mike Isaac's book, Super Pumped, is a really, really good resource for this. And I reviewed it for the Baffler last year and have pulled out some of the anecdotes. But like, I mean, it's very similar. And I'd argue that Palantir is the same way, where it's like, I mean, or that other company, Clearview AI, that has like the really psycho founder.
Right.
Like where he'll just go up to a party, take a picture of your face, and then he would look like using his company's like app. Be like, look at all this other shit I found out about you. As like a party trick. At Uber, they use this thing called like God mode, where they could literally, like as a party trick, they would put on a screen at a party showing where people were going back and forth in their Ubers, like employees at the company, like as like a party favor, just tracking, like, you know, and I think
sick.
That's, you know, it's a boundary pushing that is like, in, you know, it's to say it's in the DNA of these companies is like, it almost feels fucking trite just because of how many like times like they like put on display how abusive they're willing to be.
If that's DNA, call me human CRISPR.
Oh my God.
Sorry. I was just fixing my shoelace there.
Yeah.
I want to get back to something you mentioned, which is that, you know, Palantir, like Uber, like all of the, you know, whatever it is, the 5 or 6 other unicorns of Silicon Valley, that, you know, they require this monopolization in order to turn a profit. And yet none of them have been able to make any of that happen, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's very similar with like Tesla, for example. Like everybody wants to know, like, why is Tesla stock? Why is Tesla stock so high? Liz and I got theories. Don't worry. But the most basic answer is because like investors take at face value the Tesla proposition, which is that all cars are one day going to be Teslas because they are so far ahead as electric car manufacturers that like they're just going to totally dominate. I mean, like monopoly is and monopolization in all of these companies is so embedded. Except again, the thing is they don't actually like they don't like turn profits. And so I think one of the things as it relates to Palantir and sort of like this Thiel vision of how society works is at least, you know, where it's like, you know, the best companies, the most innovative ones are monopolies that, you know, like that are able to produce things like incredible digital Hoover vacuums for all of your personal life. I think that there's something sort of like, you know, I mean, I guess to me, it's just, I mean, aside from just saying that it's worth pointing out how creepy it is, I guess as it relates to Palantir, it's worth seeing, like, you know, if it doesn't make money now, like, how long can it continue to not make money? Like, how long is it going to get subsidized? How long is it going to keep earning money like that? And, you know, we're like a decade and a half into almost going on 2 decades into the existence of some of these places that still haven't ever turned a profit. And it makes you wonder, just like, are we willing to tolerate, like, you know, like, these kinds of money losing companies like
well, wait, but who's we when you say that?
Exactly. There you go.
Like, because that's what's interesting to me is that what we're saying is, you know, and this is like, okay, this gets into some other stuff, but maybe we, you know, whatever, let's do it. Okay, so the idea being that in a rational society, in the quote unquote real world, companies turn a profit, right?
That's the market.
And there should not, if a company doesn't turn a profit, then it shouldn't exist. Why does it continue to exist? Uber, perfect example. I mean, look, I've said the same thing about Tesla. I think people who listen to this podcast know or have a, you know, suspicion. Like, I think Tesla is a fucking sham. I think it's a Ponzi scheme. I think it's Enron. Okay. Now, and I have my reasons, which we're not getting into on this episode, but, you know,
where we go one, we go all. Tesla Q.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Shout out Tesla Q. But my point being that is assuming a lot already, right? That is basing that you're operating from a place of saying that there is something real underneath this. Right?
Yeah.
Does that make any sense?
Well, there's either like a social need or there is like a market niche or whatever that needs to get filled, and these companies are filling it. So it's like in that sort of framework, it almost becomes like they're doing this sort of like market public service or something, where like Uber has made, abundant cheap transport available to everybody.
And it has done so while making the people who invest in it lots and lots of money.
Well,
like
that's the
speculators
thing.
who got in.
providing work for people who got laid off from their 3 other jobs or maybe still working their 3 other jobs. I mean, Uber, it's like, I can't stress enough, Uber is about to overthrow a law in California. Like, I'm almost positive that they're gonna be able to pass Proposition 22, which is essentially overturning a law that was passed. It's still in the court, but that was passed this year to make Uber employees employees, which they're not currently. And so, like, these companies have like a great deal of power and influence and money without actually having to make money. It's like it's incredible.
Well, and it's because they're sort of, trailblazers. I mean, not so much in the case of Palantir, which is in a lot of ways like sort of, like I think of Palantir is easier to think of as coming in sideways, sort of like trying to take up a bunch of money that like would otherwise go to large defense contractors who are also in turn sometimes Palantir clients, like Northrop Grumman or something like that, or consultancies and what have you. And I think in the case of like these other companies, part of what they've done is, I mean, like Uber and Lyft and the 1099, quote unquote, gig economy companies have done more in the last 15 years to eviscerate American labor law protections than, I mean, anything else I can think of as like an individual, discrete specific force.
Well, they've eviscerated just the general concept of it because they've shown that like you can just baldly not only ignore it, but acknowledge that you're ignoring it and present that as a good thing, and that the suckers will buy a ticket to your show, But
I think the other thing that really trips me up, and I got into a conversation this morning with someone about this, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. And he was saying that, it sounds, absurd, right? And politically, I want to argue against this. The idea that the real economy is downstream from the financial economy, from the stock market, right? That's like every political bone in my body tells me that is absurd. No, the real economy is separate, right? But look at what has happened post-COVID. You've got basically a massive return for people at the top. Like almost everyone at the top has made more money, has got their losses back from the downturn in the market pre-COVID or in March, April. They've recovered, which includes, by the way, the surges in stock prices at Tesla and across the board at Apple and whatever. And yeah, a lot of that, whatever, the Fed, I'm not going to get into that. Anyway, but, those people have recovered. Now those companies are floated, right? They're continuing to soar. So they're continuing to exist in the real economy. This, like, the idea that these are somehow now separate, like, I don't know how to, I don't know. It's like, it's something that I really wrestle with, trying to understand and articulate this like fundamental change that has occurred in our economy. And I really do believe that something has changed.
I mean, there's a lot of, I think that one way that Palantir fits into it specifically with its IPO is that it's, like all these other companies have just IPO'd and we're at an all-time slow, like trickle for companies that are going public right now, quite obviously, because there's a pandemic going on, but also more generally, there has been a trend of companies not going public or going public later and so on. It's just sort of like, it's like a reverse of the dot-com bubble of the early 2000s. Yes. And what is now like sort of pushing these companies to go public in part is so that they can allow employees to sell shares, but also because if they want to get further investment in the future, they need to demonstrate a degree of transparency that like future investors would accept. And so they've had these kind of limited IPOs called direct listings like Palantir has had. And what's been really interesting is that like a company with as many risk factors as Palantir, that, for example, let's say Joe Biden's administration, let's say Joe Biden gets elected And there is all of a sudden, like Joe Biden is not going to fucking like, change the direction of American empire or anything. But let's say there like, budget increases that under a Trump administration would have been allotted for services like Palantir go down. Like that's a very real risk. It's a headwind. And it's one that Palantir actually warns about in its financial disclosures for going public. But at the same time, there are all these kinds of like big risk factors for a company that doesn't make any money and it chooses to go public now and its stock is like doing fairly level. Investors believe that it's a company worth $20 billion, which had you asked people just a couple of years ago if they thought was the case, a lot of people would have said it was a ludicrous overvaluation. In fact, that was sort of, I think, like the, sort of quiet consensus among a lot of people within the last couple of years. But now, as because of what Liz is saying, companies like Palantir that not only do seedy shit, but are also like sort of already, investor subsidized, projects are now like thriving in a sense. Palantir's stock price being flat from its IPO is a tremendously wonderful thing for Palantir. So when you do look at headlines about it, as like a not necessarily being able to parse the specifics of it, just know that like this has been a great week for Palantir, and next week will probably be even better. Even with, by the way, AOC announcing an investigation or asking for more details from Palantir because of its contracts and work with ICE. That's, it almost feels like barely a headwind.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a second. So it sounds like she filed that a couple weeks ago, right? Or early in September. And it only kind of came to light with the, when a company goes public, when it files for an IPO, it has to disclose a lot of public financial, it has to make a lot of internal records public, basically. And so that was one of the things that came out, that Congress was interested, or AOC and Congress was interested in looking into more detail, the ins and outs of some of the contracts that Palantir holds.
Right. And the specific issues were, and they were working with the activist group Mehente was involved in this, from what I understand. And the idea was about Palantir's work specifically with ICE. Because that has been the single contract that's gotten Palantir in the most hot water, and which they have defended. Karp has defended repeatedly that they're,
Matt Karp, stop defending this.
And a lot of it had to do with the Palantir, like whether or not their software was specifically used in detentions and setting up the camps and so on.
Yeah, which I can't imagine it wouldn't be, because the way Palantir's software works, and I mean, with the LAPD or with police departments at least, is creating these sort of like general, like I hate to use this word twice in an episode, but mosaics of a person's life. And so, where they go to school, where they work, where they live, who they hang out with. And not only can you nab maybe the specific migrant that you're looking for, but you can kind of get this like insight into a world of who they're hanging out with. Especially, many people who move to whatever country often stay in communities of people that are also from the same country they're from. And so you can easier kind of get a vision of however many of these people that you want to get. I mean, especially in we're talking about crime with the LAPD, for instance, is that like, they have these massive files that they're essentially building up on everybody, not even necessarily people who are under investigation for a crime. I mean, with some of these, you do have to enter in a case number and stuff like that. But my God, can you find a way around that? Like, it's incredible. I mean, it's not to take away from Palantir essentially coasting by on a certain degree of bullshit, but just the fact that they are collecting, these agencies are collecting this massive amount of highly personal information is just incredible.
I mean, I think a really good way of sort of like showing like the extreme risks of what you just described is that like, and this is a story from 2018 that came out about when Palantir was doing work for New Orleans. And how they use like a predictive policing system that basically mapped out like, like quote unquote gang affiliations, which are, like anytime you hear a prosecutor talk about gang affiliations, like immediately be skeptical. It's just like
predictive policing.
Exactly. Because the entire, like, I mean, it's all bullshit, but like, especially gang affiliations are basically ways to use it, like a lot of the ways that like they talk about gangs, and law enforcement and Palantir identifies them, is basically like creating networks that can be prosecuted under the RICO statutes that were initially created to prosecute the mob, like way back when, organized, like real OC. And so I think like, you know, the New Orleans story that was in The Verge from 2018, what it shows is that like the kind of, you know, network mapping that was used to identify gang members and predictive policing and stuff like that, you know, you could see it getting just as easily deployed in the way that Brace is describing, where, you know, it's about identifying undocumented immigrants and tracking them for like, you know, quite obviously like nefarious ends.
Yeah, like what Palantir is really and like pretty baldly seeking to provide is like the structure for like it basically brings the Patriot Act's dream into reality, right? Where they are able to monitor every little piece of your life, you know, from what you're doing online to what you're doing in the real world to who, I mean, many of these companies like Uber and stuff included, if you're having an affair, they can tell. You know, if you're, you know, checking out or you work 10 minutes early, they can tell. They can build up a picture of your life that you couldn't even fucking believe, that you probably don't even understand living your own life, exactly how much that they can monitor. And it's incredible. And, you know, I think a lot of people will call this fascism. This isn't actually, I mean, this is all perfectly permissible under the framework of liberal democracy, which, by the way, is also bad. And so like it is, you know, this is something that I think that the government will absolutely pursue no matter what administration.
And I mean, you can look at other governments as having like, you know, in the UK, for example, GCHQ, which is their like CIA, basically. I know that we say that it's MI6, but like GCHQ is like the real like intelligence hub there. Real heads now. And the like, you know, like they have way more expansive powers than the CIA or FBI do here. And they have way more, like they're way more plugged in.
Well, they also have, there's so much more surveillance.
Exactly.
And, I mean, the CCTV system is vast.
And you'll get arrested for saying something on Facebook, or that like that woman in Melbourne who got arrested for like saying she was going to go to like an anti lockdown protest or whatever. You know, they came to her home and arrested. And you may not agree with what these people are saying, but that's incredible that the police can do that in any country. And again, like people will call this fascism, but no, this is absolutely totally fine in liberal democracy.
There's a writer and like thinker on this, Professor Shoshana Zuboff, wrote a book that came out last year called Surveillance Capitalism. That's like, it's a very big, long book about all this. And it has some like makes some really interesting observations. But one way in which it kind of falls short that Ben Tarnoff identified really well as a way of talking about this is that like there's kind of like an instinct when thinking about this really abstract stuff, right? Like all of this like data, all of this information about us, to almost talk about it as like almost like spiritual terms, like that, you know, our privacy has been taken from us and the cost has been, you know, it's that like there's a psychic damage and toll that is being wrought by removing our privacy this way. And I think it's really important.
BPD.
I think it's really important to like take this back from the realm of like the spiritual in the sense like that this is actually no there's like a concrete material harm that's being posed by this stuff, and that there's a reason that these companies are so interested in doing as much as possible to break down the barriers between, you know, different sets of data and so on. They want to do as much as possible to collapse our like private lives into the fucking like, you know, like sewage funnel of information that they can collect. And while, you know, on an individual basis, none of us may ever be, well, some of us on this call more than others may never be like that excessively snooped on or like, you know, targeted for this kind of stuff, it is absolutely like, you know, we're seeing like the gradual creation of like a broad kind of dragnet that will, you know, is more and more able to compromise us in this way. Like, you know, we just saw this summer, like this, you know, sort of like, you know, like there were a bunch of like a mass movement protests in the street, like, and all these people, you know, like, you know, fighting and, you know, like fighting for what they believe in and all these, you know, like, you know, wonderful things we see in the street, except that like, you know, the capacity to restrain that and to fight back for it is being developed, like, you know, more substantively with just tools like this, you know, slowly and slowly every day. And while Palantir by itself may not be like the greatest threat, like what it's allowed to get away with, it's not a good sign.
Yeah, I think that you know, something that I pulled out of that New York Magazine piece was an incredible quote from Richard Pearl.
Richard Richard Pearl is you'll learn about him if you listen to Blowback. He was
I was gonna say, Noah, you should tell everyone, but yeah, no, spoiler alert. Yeah, listen to the podcast. No, he's a grand architect of the Iraq War, and
Can
all
you call
around
him the Grand Dame? I
Yeah,
really like when someone's referred to the Grand Dame as
the
something.
Grand Dame.
yes, he's
of
the
the
grand
Iraq War.
neoconservative dame of the Iraq War.
But this is what he had to say about Palantir. He said, "This is great. I have mixed feelings about the CIA, but their angel investment in Palantir may have been their most inspired move." And that is from the architect of the Iraq War.
Well, I mean, Palantir has been used in the field by the military for a little while now, and Palantir's sort of road to Afghanistan, at least, is really interesting because it sort of mirrors Thiel's personal way that he really kind of conducts these influence operations. That instead of like really just like slamming the top brass and wowing them with this tech, is he actually sought to supplant the technology they were using in the field with a more essentially similar technology, but like again with a better user interface by testing it out on mid-level like officers and lower-level soldiers first. And something that I was sort of astounded by is that Palantir actually has something called like I believe forward engineers that they sent to Afghanistan on missions with these troops, and the way, I mean, if you want to talk about unbridled surveillance, I mean, Afghanistan obviously has a vastly different infrastructure than, you know, for instance, Pittsburgh or Los Angeles. But the way that they conduct infrastructure, or excuse me, the way they conduct surveillance there is just in this total, like, I mean, there's not even the whisper of something being wrong with this, with that, and, you know, for one of the things they really point to is that they make these heat maps of where attacks are, but they also like make these profiles for as many people as they can possibly get in the country. And I mean, this is an occupying force in what should be a sovereign country that is essentially mapping out its citizenry and often at times assassinating it via those maps. It's really something. And you know, Palantir has like we mentioned, Alex Karp not exactly getting along with many of the people he interacts with. Noah was telling me earlier the generals, of course, are no exception. Famously, this podcast does have a high percentage of what you might call top brass listeners. So you know, shout out to you guys. They've really sort of, I mean, they sued the U.S. Army for Christ's sake. You know, they've really sought to get in there and become the essentially like the technology that intelligence officers both in the field and in the rear use to figure out what 14-year-old they're going to shoot next.
And I mean it's like in like the Pentagon budget is literally unfathomably large. Like on September 10th, 2001, Don Rumsfeld gave a press conference at which he, you know, like talked about how there was actually like an incredible accounting crisis at the Pentagon. There were like literally billions of dollars. They didn't know where they went. They were terrified about what, you know, he like that was where Don Rumsfeld's head was on September 10th,
he was
2001.
Like, are we about to do 9/11? Like, what is going on with this money?
Oh God! Like, I mean, have you ever just misplaced a few $1 billion and then it just shows up on an American Airlines flight?
You ever told an FBI agent, like, no, don't worry about that. That guy's just taking flight lessons because he wants to go back to Saudi Arabia and teach his boys how to fly.
He wants to take a Cessna from Orlando to Riyadh.
Exactly.
I think like the Pentagon is responsible and the defense sector is just like such an unfathomably large money pit. Like one of the biggest growth areas for Google and Microsoft right now is in their cloud computing businesses, like
Absolutely.
Google Cloud, Microsoft Azure, and they try and sell, like they bid constantly, you know, and Amazon as well. They bid constantly against one another for these kinds of contracts. And Palantir, you know, trying to stake out its own little slice of pie before anyone else can get there. You know, I mean, it all makes sense, and it's part of why also again Palantir's like sense of, you know, positioning itself as like we're not like those other like kids at school is because they want to say that like, listen, we're not doing any sus shit with the data. We're just giving you the raw uncut intel. Like it's literally
you
like
got fish scale data.
It's basically Brad Pitt like breathily talking about the raw shit.
I think that's the shit, man. The raw intelligence.
Well, and they're saying, oh, we're not selling it to advertisers.
Right.
You guys hate brands. You guys hate you hate all the advertising models. You hate all the shit you see on the internet. We're not doing that. We're not the bad guys. we're just working with the good old, troops. That's it.
And it's, I think that there's like they're able to get away with a lot in that kind of framing and positioning. And it's been really interesting, I guess, to see also how, one of the risk factors that a lot of Wall Street analysts kind of point out when they talk about Palantir now, which is interesting because they have to talk about it in sort of an abstract way, though, is the fact that a lot of who Palantir has struggled to get contracts with, but who's an obvious important potential client, are police forces and domestic law enforcement agencies, and they have struggled in the past historically with those. NYPD doesn't work with Palantir anymore, famously. LAPD had struggles with Palantir. And I think that it's going to be a really, the degree to what these analysts warn about is, will Palantir be able to start to mend those kinds of fences and bring the war home, so to speak? And I think that that's sort of going to be, if Palantir is really, really successful, then I think it's a sign that a lot more Americans are unfortunately living under the yoke of Palantir. That's going to be a pretty one-to-one connection that we can make.
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, to go back to what we started with at the beginning of all this is that the only way that these guys can be successful is if they monopolize, right? And what do they monopolize? It's the same thing with Uber. It's the same thing with WeWork, right? It's monopolizing entire sectors that should be, that becomes so large they should be nationalized, right? That the only reason Uber exists is because it's replaced public transportation infrastructure, right? Mm-hmm. And that's its ultimate goal as well. It has to become basically an arm of the state, one way or the other, in order to succeed. And it's the same thing with Palantir. It has to be the single provider of raw data, not just because it's literal business. In order for them to even create these kind of think of them as like a woven fabric that are of individual profiles. In order to create the most intricate and specific profile, which is what increasingly what these contractors want. They want really sophisticated data, really specific data, right? It's not a wide net that anyone wants to cast anymore. It's a deep net, right? You want to go into the depths. In order to do that, they have to hoover up as more and more data from more and more places so that they can figure out how to pull it all together and weave it into precise fabric profiles, right? Again, the only way to do that is to become so large that you challenge public power, that you challenge democratic accountability. That's the only way to do it. It's the only way.
And the thing is, the sort of sad truth about that is that there's no real democratic accountability to speak of. There's sort of the idea of it with these things anyways. But the thing that drives me so crazy when talking about this stuff, man, is that what we are describing is just horrific, right? The stuff that we're talking about right now, it makes me sick to my stomach. And it's there's no stopping it, right? There's no, this has just been unfolding continuously, since before 9/11, but really got kicked into start after 9/11. And it's just getting so much worse and worse. And what we're describing here is to be clear, is insane. There's going to be a company, or there's going to be whatever company, maybe it's not even going to be Palantir, whatever company replaces Palantir, but there is going to be this apparatus, woven of all these different companies and the government that can see your every fucking move. And that knows where you are 100% of the time. 60 years ago, it was contentious whether there should be laws about signing your name in hotel guest books. And now it's you can't even go to the fucking bathroom because, you got the tushy on your toilet seat and they can tell how many times a day you're shitting, right?
Well, people don't care. It's insane to me. I'm sorry. It's insane. It's we had this nationally or whatever when the fucking Snowden leaks happened. And it just I've had, I know that Greenwald was really good about this and he had all these things that's you say you don't care about privacy. Well, this is why you should care. I remember all of that shit, but people literally were well, what's the big deal? I'm not doing anything wrong. That's what people say. I'm not doing anything wrong, so I don't have to worry about it.
Well, it's also because it's it's so divorced from Like there's no like the idea of imagining what accountability would even be like is so difficult
Exactly.
to conceive of in
Yeah.
this situation, because like these companies and our political leadership have just foreclosed the possibility straight up of doing any of the things that would actually
Well,
effectively.
we foreclose it ourselves.
I mean, I like, you know, like
I
this
don't know
is-
if I totally. I mean, I don't know if I totally agree with that, because what would you do if we like? How would we act if we didn't foreclose it? What politicians are going to help us out with this? What organizations are dedicated to destroying this? Because this is fucking a part of the fabric of capitalism now. Like this is just like how it is now. And like it's not, you know, I mean there were quite a lot of people, and there, you know, there's still a lot of people who, you know, harp on about privacy and that stuff, but like it's beyond that. This is just how the system functions now.
And I think
it's
that
like,
there's a real conversation now. Like there are people who do have like different camps that are trying to present different answers to this exact question. Like probably the most visible one, at least of the last few years,
Are they anti-monopolists?
exactly, like the antitrust folks, like Matt Stoller,
Yeah.
Lena Khan, who, like, you know, I want to make it clear, like I think have some incredibly like really trenchant insights and ideas about how this stuff works, and also about the mechanics of how to make it better, or at the very, or chop it the fuck up. But like to me, there's, you know, like what sort of has to really like the ideas that have to sort of become like they will only kind of concretize once there is like the political base to make them concrete. Like as long as like Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi are sort of like in bed with these companies, like kind of tacitly, and then if not explicitly already, then I don't think that we're going to be able to like even have like a public conversation about what the proper remedies would be. Because even these camps, like the antitrust people, who within the context of like, you know, the Democratic Party are offering like, you know, an advanced but like liberal technocratic reform, like they're getting shut out. Like, and they're trying to find, and they're
Yeah.
like best positioned to like deal with this. I mean, they have a legal regime in the toolkit to fuck with these companies right in front of them, and nobody's willing to pick up and use the tools. So
Well,
it
that's
seems,
the thing
yeah.
is, you know, it's as always, political problems have political solutions.
Yes.
There's no one weird technocratic fix. You can't game the rules. You can't, you know, fix this one little thing if we just like, oh, let's make make
All
this
right,
one
if
new
we
law.
turn down the racism dial and turn up the EITC dial, then
well,
we're going to
dude,
get a.
all right. Listen,
Yeah,
no,
I
please
mean-
don't give our producer any advice here. It's
He knows what he's doing.
No, I mean, no, but it's true. It's like political problems have political solutions, and you know, Brace. I mean, I understand what you're saying. It's like, what will we do? What will we do? What we do? But even that, and saying like, we can't do this, we can't do that, we can't do this, is psychically forecloses, right? And
Oh,
I've been
yeah.
thinking a lot about like. I mean, this is getting into other stuff that probably doesn't have to do with this, but you know, it's like I think a lot how we are all creatures of the end of history, whether or not we like it, right? And like we have internalized that ethos to such a degree that, like you rightly point out, Noah, like even the idea of this not being something or being a future, or this somehow not continuing, it is inconceivable. Right? And it's at a point where, like, I don't know if our listeners have listened to the episode we did with Jathan Sadowski. I'm not saying that right. I'm sorry, Jathan. But we talked about this on our episode about 5G, right? That, like, there is this sense, particularly when we discuss technology and science, and particularly when it comes to computer technology and, you know, tech companies and whatever, that all of this is just unfolding progress, right? That none of this is contestable, that none of this has, that science and technology are not an arena of the political. And like, I don't know when that happened or why. I have some suspicions on that history, but like that attitude toward like these companies, towards the development of this technology, like has to end. And a lot of that, you know, really comes down to people making interventions in the development of these technologies themselves, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that's really sort of important to talk about also is that this is part of why it's like, you know, the conversations around like you know, like democratic control are super, super important, because like you should just like reject the premise straight up that like any of like these fuckers at Facebook or Google, like that they should be allowed to have things that have this kind of power and like, that aren't like democratically controlled fundamentally. I mean, like, let's talk about nationalization. Let's talk about like the actual instruments of democratic control. Like if we want to get, even that specific, like to me, that's sort of where it's like, if I want to feel optimistic about this stuff, and I think it's fairly like easy to do, the line of thought is that it's like, look, like I love Google. I love being able to like find things. Yeah. But it's like, I too love the internet and the many wonderful things it has given us. I also accept that like, if I want the internet, if I want those good things to survive in any meaningful way, that they can't be like they can't be allowed to be run by fucking people like either Alex Karp, Peter Thiel, or Mark Zuckerberg. Like they just can't.
I think like my sort of viewpoint on this, I don't even know what to call it, is that like, I mean, I'm of course sympathetic to the nationalization argument, and I think that like at the very least it'll certainly slow down whatever these companies are doing. But like at a certain point, I think it's just totally connected, just like with the system that we live in, and I don't just mean like the American system, but with like the global system, sort of the new world that we live in. And I want like. I mean, not just like nationalization. I want like annihilation of it. Like it is like the tools that Palantir is producing, even the tools that Google or any of these companies are really producing that creates this just like vision into my life. Like I am a man. Like I want to live as a man, free, not under like the eye or like the paternalistic fucking hand of these companies. And like I don't see like, I mean, the amount of just sheer power that these companies are gaining, and again, it's supranational. I mean, Palantir, of course, they're very connected. I mean, there's Palantir offices all over the world. They work with companies, or they work with governments all over the world. But like the like, and specifically about like Google and Amazon and stuff here is like these companies have so much like extra or supranational power that like they almost it's like a new force in the world, right? Like they should get a fucking seat at the UN. I mean, Christ, they basically own several of the seats at the UN. And like I don't like what I think. The way I think of it is like I don't think that the Stoller approach. I mean, those guys are very good at diagnosing what is wrong with a lot of these companies, but their prescriptions are dog shit because what these companies are fucking criminal. And what you do to certain kinds of criminals is what you should fucking string them up. And like again, allegedly there's not. I don't mean that literally. But like. It's the things that they're doing should not be allowed, and there's nobody that government wise that would stop them because it's not in the government's interest to stop them in a lot of cases. Especially with Palantir specifically, the government would love to have these tools available to them. There's absolutely no reason for Schumer or for Pelosi to ever turn their back on Amazon or Google or any of these companies. And if they did, I'm sure those companies would just shove a few more $1 billion, or like in the case of, I mean, look what happened in Seattle when Kshama Sawant proposed that tax. Is Amazon practically funded the entire political apparatus after that? It's absurd. And so like I think my solution is just like the same solution that morons like me have been talking about for a long time, which is just it's total war. But the problem is people aren't they don't see the need for that, because they either see that it's like this is like a discrete problem, like that sort of technocratic view of it, or they think that like this is just the natural world now, and this is like it's like declaring war against trees or something like that. Like no, or like tree, it's just something that exists in nature. But what it actually is a weed, and you can rip it out, but it takes something. It takes a large effort.
I mean, and this is, I mean, I think that like then the only rational response left when, confronted with this is, it's really just drugs and sort of, like I wouldn't say hedonism per se, but trying to find some sort of inward kind of like, just like, I mean, like half jokingly, but I mean that like, it's part of why I do feel like there is some sort of like spiritual turn or something, just because it's like people can't be trapped in the matrix for this long. Like, it's just like, it's not like, I don't want to say that it's not sustainable, because it quite obviously has sustained for some time now, but it's like, it's, like everybody's uncomfortable. I feel like, that's like at least one thing that like everyone shares these days.
Yeah, nobody likes this.
No
like,
one.
That's
no
the
one.
crazy thing. Nobody fucking likes this. And yet not only are we engaged in it, just massively, but it's like an intrinsic part of our lives now.
Oh no,
it's incredible.
Yeah, I wonder about that. Did you guys see that TikTok with that girl who was like, I thought San Francisco future was going to be like, and it was like it had like space cars and like crazy like Singapore, and then it was like what it really is, and it was like,
the McDonald's on like
2-bedroom
16th
apartments.
Street.
like literally just what San Francisco looks like. And it was
McDonald's
just
is
like,
closed now.
Oh really?
Yeah. But I was just like watching that and I'm just like, oh my God, the Zoomers are not going to save us. Whoever says that is like such bullshit.
That was, I feel like this is like a good way to close the loop because it's like that was, Peter Thiel and like his founders fund. Like the line that he's most like that he gets credited with a lot with is that like, we were promised flying cars and instead we have like, I don't know, like YouTube or whatever. And I think that like that sort of like it's at its core, it's like a childish fantasy. Like, it's like we can't, instead what it feels like in practice is that like, we can't have flying cars. So instead we're going to have Big Brother. Like we're going to we're going to sublimate our inability to conjure any of these things that we fantasized about. And we don't have a we don't actually have like a positive vision of how civil society could ever be or ever, we don't believe that like humans can have good things because we're like natural, like Hobbesian psychos. And so thus we're instead just going to build the Palantir because fuck you. And that really is it. Like it is just because fuck you.
Isn't it? It's so funny to me. That's like the like deep irony of the libertarian like ethos is that it always ends up like back in the arms of big government.
Oh yeah,
absolutely,
like 100%. And it because it's individual desire. I mean, this is the contradiction inherent to libertarianism, but also liberalism, is that it's individual desires and the extreme, like you say, the like extreme routes that it wants to go to fulfill these individual desires, whatever they are, can only happen with the security of a big fucking large system behind it, right?
Yeah, and there's, it's part of why libertarians are just like the most cucked people alive because like they like will so insanely bleat about this kind of freedom and freak out about all this stuff when in reality, obviously, all of it is like only possible and mediated by like, this like giant like daddy Law and Order figure that like they're constantly like fucking and sucking. Like that's their thing.
Yeah. Just one big insurance company.
Yes.
I guess like to our listeners out there, one thing I want to impart is that you have so many enemies. Enemies. And you really have to start treating them like enemies. I mean, this stuff can really be overwhelming, but like, they fucking hate you, and you should fucking hate them too.
Yeah, and look, they're gonna be like, obviously, like the most like simple-minded version of it is like Uber being like, if you're racist, don't ride Uber. Like, like that's like, obviously phony and bullshit and everything. But like all of like the subtle stuff that like they're gonna, like, because like Palantir is already trying to position it like they're your friend because they don't steal your data, and that's obvious. It's another pretty like nakedly disingenuous one. But like, as the fabric of civil society just comes further and further unraveled, like they're going to try even harder to be your friends, and it's just like the obligation of every ethical thinking person everywhere to scream fuck you back as loudly as you can.
Well, a big talking point now, especially related to the Uber stuff, is people like be like, well, capitalism needs racism or whatever. I'm like, brother, you don't know what fucking capitalism needs. Like, capitalism needs one fucking thing. It's exploitation, and they will get that through whatever means available. And so like it can adapt, it can move, it can do anything. And so people kind of create these mental laws in their head of like, well, if it's doing this, it's like, but no, brother, it is they are your enemies. They hate you. They want you fucking, they call it wage slavery for a reason, brother. Like it's.
And that's right. And who was the original enforcer of all wage slavery? That's it. The Jews.
Mm-hmm. And so I would like to announce that Noah and I have started the Christ Fund. We are regaining Christ's sort of message as a Jew, his pre-Christian message.
It's atoning for years of, just years of being Jewish.
Yeah, we're our bad.
Yeah, this is actually our Yom Kippur like atonement perspective was to become Christian.
Exactly. Well, Noah, thank you.
Please.
This episode went a little off the rails.
I love doing this. This is
Yeah,
great.
this was fun. But I gotta say, like, we actually have a lot to say about the man, the myth, the legend, Peter Thiel. So we're gonna have Noah back to do part 2 of this because
Twink
Peter
talk.
Thiel. There's just too much to get into, and he's just a really fascinating figure, and we've kind of talked about him in the past, and I feel like we owe our listeners a little Thiel episode, so we got that coming.
All right. Thanks for having me.
You can check out Noah's podcast Blowback on and every podcast platform now. It's been all made available, right?
Yep. And please listen. And
It is, fantastic. It is. If you liked our 9/11 episodes, you'll love the Blowback. Yeah. Oh fuck! I have a really good joke, but I can't make it. I'll make it.
Dude,
I'll
make
it
it.
after we go off the air. Okay. And our Teal episode will be named Bareback.
So, I just remembered something that I forgot to mention when we were talking, which is, remember when I said I want to put a pin in this Colorado thing?
Yeah.
Okay, so to my fellow tinfoil hatters out there, first of all, I see you, I hear you, you're always valid.
And reflective.
And I want to say that I've put my tinfoil hat on, and I think that it's not just about Denver being cheaper than Silicon Valley, which is the obvious explanation for Palantir leaving Silicon Valley for Denver, but that, there's a big secret military complex in the mountains of Cheyenne. This thing is massive. NORAD, Northcom, and other Pentagon operations are headquartered there.
Featured in the movie War Games.
But seriously, I actually think that is maybe one of the reasons. And the military has a massive presence in the state of Colorado. Also, there's the secret tunnels under the Denver airport.
The Mole Children.
Yes, Mole Children. There's the scary Bronco with the laser eyes. And the Hitler murals.
I also once played a show in front of 30 juggalos in Denver, Colorado. Had a
How did it go?
miserable time. I did not enjoy myself. Not a big places guy. Whenever I go somewhere, I'm always like, this ain't, why am I here?
That's funny because you're always complaining about where you're at.
I know, but then it's I like some places, but then this was a long tour, and so I was just in Denver. I'm like, what mining or whatever do they need to do here?
What's
going
Denver?
on? Why is there a Denver? And I know a bunch of Denvorians are going to email us, be like, actually, Denver is a really good craft brew scene. Or you know what? Most girls in Denver's are fucking 10s, bro. But you know what? I walked the streets of Denver. They were empty. They were silent. I found nothing. I was chilly, despite it being early fall. And I'll tell you what, I saw them Snow Peak Mountains there, and I remembered the brutal massacres of miners there in the early 20th century. And I saw their ghosts flying through the sky, and they told me, you guys don't have to spend the night here. You guys can just keep driving to the other town. It's fine. Just spend the night in, I can't remember where we went next, but that's what the ghost told me.
Yeah, I'm good on Denver.
Yeah. I you know what? I'm not a Boulder guy either. Never been there, but I'm not liking what I'm hearing.
I've never been to Boulder.
I did invent the rock climbing technique of bouldering.
Sure.
Which is just, it's where you climb a boulder.
And you love to play Boulder Dash.
I do love to play Boulder Dash, and I also like to wear Boulder hats.
And Boulder ties.
And I like to be bolder than most guys are when I tell my co-host she's being very witty. No man will tell that to Liz. Men are terrified of Liz, except for me.
No, they're not. Are they?
Are you kidding me? So I'm in a Slack with something like 65-75% of the guys on Earth.
Oh my God.
And in our Liz channel, it's all just guys being like, dude, I don't think I can do this. I tried to send her an email. My computer blew up. I did give them your email address. if that's cool.
All right. Thank you guys. I'm Liz.
Oh, wait. Are you talking to me and Young Chomsky when you said thank you guys?
Yeah.
You're welcome. I'm Brace. Thank you to our listeners. And Young Chomsky is our producer and also is very grateful for Liz's thank you. And we're the podcast TrueAnon.
And we will see you next time. Bye-bye.
Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein. Come in. Jeffrey Epstein.
I'm really hungry, baby, so I'm not going to be funny for this.
You know what? I'm hungry too.
Yeah, I'm on strike. What should I eat?
Are you on hunger strike?
Yeah. Well, so listen, if you can be like, I know I've talked about this on the show before, but this
Are you
really
doing your
bugs me.
intermittent fasting bit?
If you can do if you can call just not eating breakfast intermittent fasting, then I get to call me being hungry and being grumpy intermittent hunger strike. The same logic.
So it's just like you're going on strike for periods and then you're breaking strike and then you're going.
Exactly.
So you call it in the morning, you have break strike.
Exactly. Exactly. I cross the picket line to my kitchen and eat several hard-boiled eggs that I make throughout. At the beginning of the month, I boil about 300 eggs. And then I kind of just keep them around my kitchen like Easter eggs. Like I put one in
Remember?
the salt jar.
Wait, do you remember the thing about night eggs?
No. What? No.
What?
Wait.
Was it
does that
a
happen to
tweet
you
or a
too?
piece? I can't remember if it was a tweet or like a article or something.
Let me
but it
guess.
was like
Women have been laying eggs in the night now.
no. It's gross, sir. It was like some woman was saying that she got hungry in the middle of the night and she kept peeled hard-boiled eggs next to her bed and she would eat them and she called it night eggs.
Jesus. Most women I found just keep Italo Calvino books, a lamp, and some like crystals next to their bed. This is I don't know if this is an evolution or a devolution. Now, you want to know what I got on my bedside table right now? I got a magazine, I got a lint roller, and I got a some Neosporin. I keep them there at all times.
Sounds lovely.
Yeah. Well, I found that it's a real show of dominance when you have I'm not being funny anymore.
You're too hungry to be funny.
I'm too hungry. I can't do it anymore.
You know what? Cue the intro.
Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein. Come in. Jeffrey Epstein.
All right, so I ate some more of my pubic hair, and I am now full, and I'm
Jesus
ready to
Christ.
do the actual intro now.
Okay. Well, hello everyone. That was disgusting. I'm Liz.
I thought it was pretty good. I'm Brace, and we are joined by producer Young Chomsky. This is the podcast TrueAnon podcast, available on Apple, iTunes, podcast apps, also Stitcher. Why do people use different ones?
I don't know. I just
use
use the one that
came with
comes
the phone.
with.
Me
Yeah.
too. It's like when you
Use the
see
one that
somebody
comes
has like
with.
exactly. You see somebody's got like another like internet thing on their phone. It's like, what? How did you do that?
Also, it's not even how did you do it. It's like, were you that bothered? What's wrong with the
Exactly.
one that comes with? Just
Well, you
go with
can't-
the. What? You care that much about your applications? No.
How many podcasts are you listening to? Well, I shouldn't ask that.
What are you doing on your phone?
What's going on there? You know what I do? Is what I do
Just
is
put the phone down.
if someone's texting me, I go into there and I type a bunch of stuff so it looks like I'm texting them back, and then I don't send it. So they're like, "What was he gonna say?"
That's
People love
so
that
awful.
Yeah, people love that one. Or I say, "Hold up."
You really are Dennis the Menace.
If you search my phone for "hold up," there are thousands of people that I've just ended conversation with. By
You
being
fucking
like,
said
"Hold
that
up."
to me, you asshole.
Well, yeah, I know. I actually do. Well, because I can text for like 5 minutes and I have to do something now. I don't understand how text is supposed to work. Because if you're texting, you have to look at your phone the whole time. But if I'm having like a conversation with someone over text, then I have to look at my phone for like 30 minutes
Yeah.
straight.
Yeah. People
I
like
just
looking at their
assumed you-
phones.
I just assumed you had like another way to do that.
No.
But
Okay, so last week we talked about Palantir with Noah Kulwin, and if you got to the end of the episode, you realized that we had more to talk about, and so welcome, that's this episode.
We are calling this the Dork Enlightenment.
Apparently that's what we're calling it. And Noah Kulwin is back to talk about the man, the myth, the legend, Peter Thiel.
so let me do it this time. So let's just start it right here. Like that?
Yeah, let's get to it.
What? No! Hold on! No! Do not cut to it! Okay, and let's roll it then.
What about if we roll
No.
it now?
No, you fucking.
I think we should get to it now.
Wait, hold up. Can we pause real quick? Actually, I'm sorry. I'm getting a really important phone call. Just kidding, bitch! Roll the fucking interview! So I'm really happy to welcome Noah here today because several times in my life I have signed mutual suicide pacts, but those have almost exclusively been with beautiful women who I've tricked and unfortunately had to flee the country because of. Today what we're doing here is we are all looking at each other in the eyes over this beautiful online meetup thing, and we're agreeing to be sued into oblivion. So without further ado, my name is Richard Franzak.
Hey.
Brace Belden was sick today. He couldn't make it, and he had absolutely no input on what we're talking about. I'm joined here by Lisa Loeb.
Absolutely.
And by Rob Schneider Jr. Welcome.
Fine.
TrueAnon.
Sure. Rolling with it.
You know what? I have to say, because we fucked up last time and we said that Noah was the first three-peat, and that's fucking wrong, and I feel terrible. That's terrible. I'm so sorry. Michael was 3, and Ben, of course, has been on 5 times.
Ooh, that's true. Yeah, well, I fucked it up because these are 3 standalone ones, and those were series. But yeah, no, that's literally, I was incorrect. Also, one thing I have to add, from friend of the pod, Twitter user Human, the InQtel thing that we talked about last time, Palantir CIA funder, the gentleman in charge of that who helped fund Palantir had previously, I mentioned that he brought Tetris over from the Soviet Union. What I didn't mention is that he did that under the auspices of Robert Maxwell, Ghislaine Maxwell's father. So
It all
yes.
comes full
What a tangled
circle.
web
yeah.
we weave.
So as you can understand, we have, from all of the references we've made so far, we have Noah Kulwin back in the pod, and by that I mean our polypod, not the actual podcast ourselves. I don't believe we're recording. We have Noah Kulwin here to talk about Peter Thiel.
Yes, our good friend and ally.
Because we talked a lot about Palantir last time, and which, of course, you can't talk about Palantir without talking about Palantir. But we have, let's say, a little bit more of a focused gaze this time.
Yeah, I mean,
And we're
what's the
talking about-
point of talking about Oz without mentioning the wizard, you know?
Exactly. Yeah. We are talking about one of the most twink-loving men in Hollywood, Peter Thiel.
God damn it.
Yes. Sorry, guys. It's going to be a lot of that.
I mean, I think that the reason why we wanted to talk about Thiel and Palantir in particular was because Thiel, I mean, at least I've said this a couple times and I stand by it, that there's like 2 people in tech, Silicon Valley tech, however we want to call that scare me. And that's Peter Thiel and Jeff Bezos. And like those 2 people, I kind of like, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. I could be totally wrong. And maybe there's an interesting debate there, maybe not. But they strike me as not just like that they're somewhat ideologues, but there's a different sort of will to power behind them individually than maybe the other kind of philosopher kings of Silicon Valley, the Zuckerbergs and the, Tim Apples and,
Priscilla Chan.
yeah, what have you. But that there's something about these guys, and we're not talking about Bezos, so we'll just focus on Thiel in particular, that that their project doesn't seem limited to just let's say like tinkering with new technology that could be fun, or just like, having an impact on people's lives or whatever. Even Google doesn't, even the guys at Google don't strike me as, let's say, as interested in world making as maybe someone like Peter Thiel.
Yeah, I think that that's a really good way to put it. And I think that Thiel is also, he's, there are other tech billionaires who are willing to throw their weight around politically, like, Mark Benioff, and even
future
the
mayor of San Francisco, or one of his associates.
I've been paid $25 an hour to phone bank in the Salesforce office, and it was good money. It was more than I was making at regular work.
So like, somebody like Benioff, and then even the so-called apolitical tech billionaires like, Mark Zuckerberg, they're just as political and have just as much, are interested in putting their thumb on the scale. Peter Thiel is like an activist political billionaire in a really interesting way. And he's an activist in, how he acts as a businessman. He's an activist in how he approaches, where his personal political dollars go. And I think that like he is an ideologue. His ideology is pretty nebulous and it's hard to pin down, and that's how he wants it. But I think that it's absolutely worthwhile kind of trying to unpack a little bit, some of the mystery surrounding the man.
Yeah, absolutely. And it wouldn't be fair to discuss one of the great apes of the jungle without discussing the jungle itself. So where Thiel is from, Thiel is like 90% of my enemies. And by the way, I know we have listeners in Germany. This is not about you or maybe some of your family members, depending on how far back we're going. But he is of German descent. His father is a chemist from Germany, which is one of the most, just racially, I don't feel good hearing those words put together. So I'm sure he left Germany. His father left Germany, went to South Africa. So out of devotion to principles of social justice in this apartheid era South Africa, and then settled here in America, where baby Thiel was brought up, but he wasn't born. I believe he was born in Frankfurt. After that, Thiel, not super familiar with his early life, don't really give a fuck. But a very important thing to note is that he went to Stanford, and like everybody who went to college, never stops talking about it. He's you know how you see well, actually the first person that comes to mind is Jeffrey Epstein, but he didn't actually go to Harvard. But you see like a 50-year-old wearing like a sweatshirt that says like NYU or something, and you're like, come on, man, you went there. Why are you thinking about that? I don't think about my middle school.
I think the rule is that like after age 25, if you own college apparel and you're not presently enrolled there, then like that not cool, lame.
Yeah, no, you're a pedophile, and actually cut that. Actually, you know what? Keep it in. No, you are a pedophile. Yeah, except for Peter Thiel. But Peter Thiel is one of those guys who is very much into the politics and the teachings of his alma mater, which would be Stanford. He went there and has continued to be an activist voice on campus.
Well, and he also taught a class there has taught a course there called 0 to 1 that I mentioned. Was also the name of his book in the Palantir episode. The thesis of which is about how like every sane business, every good smart startup aspires to be a monopoly and so on. And I think that he that's sort of as much as you need to know about like some of the pedagogy that's going on there. There's not too much more to it that I think a thinking person should really have to care about.
In this guy's case, it's the pedagogy of the repressed.
That is really good. That's really good, man. I got to give it to you.
I also want to say that Harvard and Yale get a lot of attention for the people that come out of there and where they end up in, in media and academia and of course in the government. But like Stanford deserves just as much. Like we don't talk about Stanford in the same way that we talk about Harvard and Yale, or like it doesn't get thrown around in that because for whatever reason it's on the West Coast maybe. But
Yeah,
like
I think that's literally why.
like Stanford Business School is, I mean, talk about like some of the worst of the worst. Like all of McKinsey like comes out of Stanford Business. Like some of the like, I mean, it's just a training ground for, I think, the most like rapacious, repugnant fucking like vultures of private equity, and it's, you know, every industry associated.
I mean, there's and it's a very I think it's so closely tied into like the fabric of like Silicon Valley as an industry. Like the origin stories of almost basically all of the major like software companies excepting Microsoft is wrapped up in Stan, and to some extent Microsoft even, but like I do think, I guess like one of the things to say about Stanford, and I say this, like, you know, having like spent pleasant time on the campus and everything, is also that it's like it allows the people who are like in its orbit and allows those software freaks to like pretend like they are in college as they're doing it. Like they never have to leave that world. It's very much like a self-contained atmosphere.
I think it's good to like kind of compare it in that way to like Yale and Harvard Law, which are just like basically training grounds right up into either the big law firms or like very important government positions. Like it's like a feeding tube into these institutions in the same way that Silicon Valley is becoming more and more like you know, an institution in its own right.
Well, I think a lot of people tend to think of like colleges as like not neutral, but like, you know, a place you go to learn, when they actually are very clearly, especially like these sort of places, are training grounds for like the future administrators and the future rulers of the world. Like they are sort of in their essence enemy territory.
Yes.
And that's not just because I went to City College.
We take the Pol Pot view of the academy here on TrueAnon.
but not of guys who wear glasses. I
mean,
Actually,
even if I was
medals.
inclined to like disagree with you about that, like you just can't deny that that's what Stanford especially is more than any, like it's the most like that of any university possibly. I mean, it's like they have Tobias Wolff. They have that going for them.
They also have the Hoover Institution.
Oh, and Condi Rice runs the Hoover Institution. Great lady.
Condi Rice, who also, as we'll get to shortly, was forced to disavow Peter Thiel because he said rape is fake.
Well, let's get into that. Tell us more about his life at Stanford.
Well, yeah, and the crew he was running with, the set that he ran with, so to speak.
Well, you're probably a little more familiar with this than I am, but as you get, you know, all these motherfuckers, Silicon Valley dickheads, have their origin stories like, oh, I met, you know, Bozo Clark while we were, you know, walking the halls of the CompuSci bullshit.
So he comes into that set, like he first encounters the people that Thiel first encountered at Stanford and then Stanford Law, like a lot of the people that, you know, he would like in the orbit that he would probably encounter and be close to for the rest of his life, including people that he would go on to work with at PayPal. But he had like he's like a little bit unconventional in that he went to work on Wall Street and for a white shoe law firm before he ended up coming back to the Valley. And if you wanted, like, you know, like his early years, he basically, he and Elon Musk merged their own startups to create what is now what became PayPal, and that's how they made like their first money. And Thiel, like, you know, in those early years, like, you know, he was just a successful entrepreneur. It was his investment in Facebook that sort of elevated him in, like, you know, to the billionaires club in a big way. But I absolutely think, like, you know, that those early years, like when he was at Stanford and so on, like that is where like the intellectual ferment happens that, you know, that we're describing.
Yeah, I do know that he took like certain right-wing philosophers classes. I can't remember their fucking names, but I don't care anyways. And sort of gained a lot of his worldview from that as well. I know, of course, I didn't mention this earlier, but when he was very young, he read a lot of Ayn Rand, which generally not a good sign for someone growing up to be somebody that I don't want to put in prison. And that, like, that seems to have shaped a lot of his experiences, and then, or at least a lot of his worldview, and then that worldview was further shaped by becoming this like successful entrepreneur.
and he also had like, he like read like Rene Girard, I believe, and had like this. He cultivated like, he cultivated like a sense and viewed himself and viewed himself then as like somebody carrying out like the tradition of like, I think like radical conservative thought. And he carried it out in rather extreme ways even then.
Well, after he left Stanford, he does the thing that really upstanding cool guys do. Although actually he might have started it while he was at Stanford, but something called the Stanford Review. So listeners might be familiar with the Dartmouth Review, which is infamous for Dinesh D'Souza's gay watch columns, where he would just out students for being gay. Laura Ingraham, who there's a lot of history there with me and her, but Laura Ingraham also wrote for that, and of course the National Review, which is like the Dartmouth Review but for fatter people, who Trotskyioid types. Stanford Review was like a less incendiary version of that, although still fairly incendiary, and
it was part of like a network. Like there's a whole network of I think actually Jane Mayer talks about these in Dark Money, but basically like conservative donors have for years propped up newspapers and conservative student publications, sort of an outgrowth of like earlier efforts like Young Americans for Freedom, which like were active in like the 60s and 70s, and like these like intellectual publications. Like Peter Thiel comes into the Standard Review, he co-founds it, and it's part of a long lineage of like shit-stirring racists and bigots and so on, to develop like their craft or whatever, hone their craft in college.
So our extremely old but still wise and dignified listeners might remember in the late 80s, early 90s is sort of when like the first kind of big PC wave hit, and Stanford was not immune from that. Thiel and in his Stanford Review are very much not happy with that. And it turns into, years later, I think in the mid-90s, 96, Peter Thiel and one of his buddies, whose last name is Sachs, but whose first name I can't remember. David Sachs, write a book called The Diversity Myth. And you might be wondering, like, well, maybe they're talking about diversity of thought. They don't like that. Turns out, they're talking about diversity of everything else except for thought. The thing is, they thought there's like, well, you got all these. I think they have. There's one line from the book where they're like, people, the left thinks diversity looks like a bunch of people from the Star Wars cantina hanging out, which tells you the kind of fucking caliber of people we're dealing with here. But what it actually looks like is when you let me have my opinions. And, of course, his opinions are being funded by, I'm sure, whatever fucking dark money sources are funding Stanford Review at this time. But he that book later comes to really bite him in the ass. He's forced to apologize for a bunch of different sections in it. And I believe they dedicate the book, although I might be wrong about this, it's certainly in the book, to a student who was kicked out of Stanford for standing outside a gay professor's house and yelling, "Die faggot, I hope you die of AIDS." And because he was kicked out, that showed that that Stanford was sort of saying that gay people are more likely to get AIDS, and so it's not a preferable lifestyle to hold.
And I mean, so there's that like incident that you just described, the like can't wait until you die faggot.
Yes.
The like one person who is like I know that there's some dispute over whether or not he was the person who said it, but the like one of a law student who was like among the among those who were there like shouting it was Keith Rabois, who is like part of like the Thiel PayPal mafia and has gone on to become like he's like still remains like a big tech impresario, and also like Thiel has since come out of the closet.
Yeah, and it's funny too. The Stanford Review, I've heard from some of my sources, has always been run by a gay libertarian. Like 100%. It's one of those, like, we're probably going to talk a lot about in this episode about like Thiel's kind of network that he has, especially in terms of Stanford and in the technology. But just even at the Stanford Review, everybody who's run it has essentially been, let's say, under Thiel's wing and of the same sort of like same mold, essentially, which is a gay libertarian.
I want to say too that like I just was looking at the Diversity Myth, like the blurb on Amazon, and it's so funny how we are still fucking having this conversation. Like this reads like something that you would read in like the fucking Atlantic. like now.
Well, you say that, but it's like
insane.
when
Like
that
we
book
haven't left this fucking conversation.
when that book came out, think about it, like the bell curve is still basically
Yeah.
freshly published in the New Republic. Like, I think that there is, like, Thiel is, like, a lot of this stuff, it was extreme for the time, but it's, again, like, it's important, I think, to keep connecting it to just, like, it's part of, like, the same old, like, like, conservative intellectual machine that is like reliably
absolutely.
like tried to like disguise itself at different points in as something other than what it like straightforwardly is.
Yeah, and I think you see it like in the fabric like today in these conversations, like saying like
Absolutely.
the debilitating impact that politically correct multiculturalism has on education and academic freedom. That's literally like an op-ed in the New York Times like right now.
Yeah, 100%. And it's like it's there's a lot of arguments about like what I think would be now called rape culture in the book. Thiel at one point writes, since a multicultural rape charge, which I don't know what that means, may indicate nothing. What's a multicultural rape charge? May indicate nothing more than belated regret. A woman might, quote, realize that she had been raped the next day or even many days later. Under these circumstances, it is unclear who should be held responsible. If the alcohol made both of them do it, then why should the woman's consent be obviated any more than the man's? Why is all blame placed on the man? This was like a big sort of bugbear for Thiel at the time. At one point, I think he's like, how could a woman be raped if she doesn't have physical marks from it? Like that's ridiculous. There's no force or whatever.
That was written in the 90s. In 2009, on the blog of the think tank Cato, he like wrote that basically he believed that like since women got the right to vote, it's generally been kind of a net negative. If you really think about it. And so he like, I don't bring that up just to, I only bring that up to say that like, he will try to say, well, that was like, 25 years ago. Are you really going to make such a fuss about it? And it's like, well, 10 years ago, you said something that like was fairly in line with that. So I don't know, mister.
Well, and that's like still like, that's a repeated line in like neo-reactionary stuff now. Like, which I think we're going to get into. But like, that is one of the points of contention that like women in the workplace, and they tie that to also women voting, has been a net negative on society as a whole for a whole bunch of reasons,
Yeah.
So Thiel's influence at Stanford isn't only felt in the Stanford Review, which I'm sure, by the way, is very widely read. He's also he is a bigwig in the Stanford CompuSci program. And in fact, like from what I hear, he has essentially full control over it. I guess the way it works is that there's these big sort of introductory classes for new students who join, thousands of people that are sort of overseen by a couple like ministers essentially, who are also chosen from, I believe, older students. And the two people who are always in charge of it, like the students in charge of thousands of other students, 2,000 every quarter, are always run by Thiel people. And these are people who either intern at Palantir or one of his friends' companies over the summer, or who actually like work already part-time at Palantir. And there's something called like the CS fraternity there, which is essentially like Thiel. It's a way for Thiel and Palantir to exercise control over this program. I mean, in the Stanford CompuSci program, I mean, it's fucking Stanford. It's fucking computer science. Like, it's pretty prestigious to get to. But at one point, like other recruiters from other big companies like Microsoft, Google, and whatever weren't even really trying to recruit from there because Thiel had such an incredible lock on it. And that's just a sort of another. It's the way that Thiel operates, and it's the same way he sort of like, his recent reporting has shown that he really got that Palantir like ingratiated with the military, is he doesn't actually necessarily start from the top. He starts from mid-level people and have them work down, which, I guess it's also starting from the top, but I mean, not the very top, has them both work down and up. And it's this sort of like way that Thiel organizes things that's like, it's fairly insidious, but like it works pretty well. And so he also hosts StarCraft tournaments at the Palantir office.
Okay, that's cool.
I don't know what that is. What is that?
It's a very good
StarCraft,
computer game.
it's like Warcraft in space. It's Warcraft, Liz?
No, what is that?
It's
Is that a video game?
Are you familiar with orcs?
Your command, master.
No, I don't know what an orc is.
It's like a very it is legit. I mean, like I'm being totally sincere when I say that it's like an incredibly entertaining competitive video game to watch, and people who are really good at it are really really smart. That's all.
It's like
I
a
can
Korean
say.
thing, right?
Yeah, I mean it's huge there. I mean it's faded a bit just because like it's not as popular of a game anymore. But like there was like a kid in my orientation group at college, and he was like a professional StarCraft player, and now he's like I think he's like a neurologist. Like he's really good. He's like really smart.
Yeah,
I
I played it when I was in middle school, but I was not very good at it. Not like competitively, like against the.
Oh, I'm
computer
like
who would
I'm
beat
so
me.
bad.
But Thiel, he's always
Yes.
looking for the best. And so like Palantir has this lock over the CompuSci program at Stanford and can really pick and choose between who is going to be like who they want to work at Palantir, the most talented people. However, unless you are Asian, because they did have to pay a $1.7 million lawsuit over accusations in 2017 that they were purposely not hiring or even interviewing Asian people.
Sounds like diversity isn't really a myth.
Exactly. Look at that.
Look at that.
He also was found to be hiring orcs,
Work complete.
which is really sort of like he was bringing them on H-1B visas over here from the Warcraft realm, from the world of Warcraft.
That's stupid. My joke was better.
Yeah, true. Okay, I'll take that. Yes, that's correct. But yeah, I mean that sort of like it's just indicative of the way that Thiel works, and he has his claws in like a lot more stuff than people might know about. I also do have it on good authority, very good authority, that Peter Thiel held the son of a very prominent Baltic politician, very prominent, in something like I'm not going to say sexual thrall. I would never say that. But when this guy was going to Stanford, certainly had a very paternalistic relationship to this young Baltic man who has since gone back and started a political career of his own. So who knows what Thiel's doing? What other pies he's got his little fingers in.
So I think like one sort of thing that's kind of important to understand Peter Thiel is that like a lot of people try to affect the world, and billionaires in particular, they try and change the world by changing political parties, by changing corporations, by changing, large NGOs, or even directly influencing governments. And in America, like traditionally, billionaires have been, like the wealthy are pretty content, I think, to kind of work through conventional political channels. It's the structure of our society, and that's how they're able to make the change they want. What Peter Thiel, I think, was able to do with the destruction of Gawker was, achieved through a really impressive kind of like will to destroy that makes him fairly unusual. And that he's willing to show it that he was willing to show his hand so brazenly, because ultimately, even though he kept it secret, was very, very happy to take credit for it when the time came. And the origin of the story, like, I think, to make it clear, was that Gawker wrote a story, the blogger Owen Thomas, who later went on to be the business editor of the SF Chronicle, a job he may still hold. Nice guy, has a cute little white dog. Maybe I hope the dog hasn't died since, named Ramona.
Well, if he works at the SF Chronicle, I'll probably end up suing him at some point.
Yeah, well, used to see him at Martuni's.
Great bar.
And Owen wrote a post that was like, hello, Peter Thiel is gay, people. And Owen is himself gay. And it wasn't like outing Peter Thiel. It wasn't. Peter Thiel was known as like an out gay man to quite like anybody in the Bay Area. It was like not like
an open secret.
Exactly. Like it's really to say that it was something that was his private life and shouldn't have been referred to like by like a newspaper or a blog is crazy. But supposedly Peter Thiel believed himself to be wounded. He tries to engage with Valleywag. This was Gawker's Silicon Valley blog and blah 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 blah. And so he bides his time, but ultimately an associate of his comes up with this idea, which is basically, listen, like Gawker has insurance that helps them pay lawsuits when they get, sued by some guy. What if we just find as many people as possible who have credible, like suits or credible cases at the very seem like it? We go to a state where there's no anti-slap protections, meaning that there are no laws preventing people from filing frivolous lawsuits, and let's just sue the shit out of Gawker, and hopefully something will strike. Yeah. And that something was Hulk Hogan's case.
We based our love on the 3 commandments of the training, the prayers, and the vitamins, but you threw it all away, man.
Now, I'm not really going to get into the particulars of publishing the Hulk Hogan sex tape.
I will.
Okay,
I will.
Go for it, homeboy.
No. Like the moral ethics of it. I mean, I just don't.
No,
care,
I mean, I like if you want to give the play-by-play, you seem to know it so well.
Well, I've jerked off to the video. Hulk Hogan is on video fucking the wife of his friend, Bubba the Love Sponge. Right in the pussy, he fucks her. It's insane.
Who, by the way, was part of like a wife swapping circle with David Petraeus. That surfaced.
Really?
Yeah, it was referenced in like a court. Google Petraeus Bubba the Love Sponge. It comes up even in.
What's funny is I have Googled that and nothing. I didn't see anything.
Wait, really?
No. Why would I have Googled that? Was no.
No, I'm like, I'm not making this up. Like, come on, believe me.
I've jerked off to a video of David Petraeus just going hog on Bubba the Love Sponge's wife's clitoris. It's just
it's Mrs. Love Sponge.
Excuse me. Yeah, I'm sorry. But let me tell you, like a real sponge, a lot of liquid going around there.
Okay.
Yeah, absorbent. Anyway, so like the Hulk Hogan sex tape, Gawker publishes the Hulk Hogan sex tape. It is like let's be clear, under any single laws are fake. The jurisprudence is bullshit. I don't respect any of it. It doesn't matter on a moral principle, on a moral level. A law does not tell you anything. So just get that up front. That said, the legal precedent was fairly clear after 200 fucking years of the First Amendment or whatever. And neither the Hulk Hogan case nor Peter Thiel being said that he discussed as a homosexual were things that should have been the grounds for anything legal. Any sort of justified legal action.
Yeah,
However.
Yeah.
They struck lucky with Hulk Hogan for a few reasons. Some legal reasons, and then also because the trial judge that they got was literally the attorney for Terry Schiavo's parents, who was given her judgeship as a reward by Governor Jeb Bush, and is just a dumb lady, really stupid. If you ever watch the
kind
videos
of person to be like, oh, Hulk,
and the coverage of the trial was bullshit. The New York Times wrote a story they took out of quote, they misquoted, there was a Gawker editor, AJ Delario, said sarcastically in the middle of a 4-hour deposition, is there a sex tape of an age of somebody you wouldn't publish? And he said 4-year-old, and that was taken it was clearly said sarcastically, and the New York Times printed it with the opposite meaning. Say whether or not you think it's wise legal strategy. Obviously, it was fucking stupid. It was a real it was sensationalized in the wrong way. And so Hulk Hogan wins. Gawker is not allowed to appeal. They are literally required to come up with the I think $46 million is what I think it was ultimately they had to pay up front in compensatory and punitive damages. And they had to pay it up front, and they were not allowed to appeal. And so it was not because.
Why couldn't they appeal?
Because a judge has to allow you. They have to, because in order to formally appeal, they would have had to pay the judgment. They would have had to they were literally prevented. Tom Skoka in his piece that's on the Gawker website, it's one of the last one. He describes the moments of it, but it's Gawker was not they didn't have they didn't have the money, and that's not anybody was going to loan it to them. So. And had they been able to pursue it, they probably would have won it on. They almost surely would have won it on appeal. But it it was really just about the fact that they could not summon the amount of money necessary because the size of the judgment was so big. And so Peter Thiel, as a rich guy, through force of will and luck, and through using a venture capital strategy, because the logic of how a venture capitalist makes money is that they invest in 50 million different companies, and only one of them has to make it really huge, big.
That's right. That's why it's called seed funding, because a lot of. So let me tell you guys about that. The Belden plan. I'm telling you, you have as many kids as possible.
We already know where you're going with this.
Screamin' Jay Hawkins did this as well. You have as many kids as possible. You watch the news for their name coming up. If it's coming up in a Balloon Boy type context, you do not contact. If it's coming up in a Peter Thiel context, you do contact because your son is rich now and you can be like, oh, I was actually kidnapped and couldn't contact you.
God damn it.
Yeah. Yeah, this is called
The Belden arrangement.
I've done this. I've been doing this since I was 16.
I've been doing this.
I've been doing this.
So that's how Peter Thiel does the Gawker case. Like he funded a bunch of bullshit suits against Gawker. Like Fran
Yeah.
Drescher's former life partner,
Right,
Shiva
I remember that.
Ayyadurai, like stuff that had no merit, and eventually the Hogan thing went out. And like Hulk
Yeah.
Hogan is a piece of shit, and the reason that he sued Gawker in the first place was because Gawker published like the revelation of the Hogan sex tapes basically led to the revelation of Hulk Hogan like screaming the N-word repeatedly.
That was the big
yes,
deal.
And that was
Wasn't-
why he sued them, was because like he lost his affiliation with WWE. Like his professional prospects were pretty fucked at that point. It was a low point for the Hulkster. So I think that like the Peter Thiel like. Ryan Holiday wrote a book called Conspiracy. It's a really bad book, but that's like the book to read if you want like the Thiel side of it, in which it's like, like what is it? Like Ryan Holiday poses like fatuously, like what is a conspiracy? And that's like really how Thiel, like they cultivated this as like, I could not like I believed Gawker was a negative influence in the world because I'm a small-brained person who believes that tabloids are like are like the root of all evil, I guess, because they called me gay or something. Like even the grievance is still ill-formed.
Did
but whatever.
they?
And
You got owned. Oh
Yeah.
no. Oh, sorry. You're being Teal in this.
yeah. No, Gawker never called me gay. I don't think. I don't. Anyway,
That's actually why they shut down that other website they put up.
Oh. And so like he views it though as like he was able to like influence the world and change it and make it better through just like spending a lot of fucking money doing this. And by the way, the practice of covertly funding lawsuits to like for the purpose of like assaulting your enemies, it's called champerty, and it's outlawed in many countries.
Sorry. What's it called?
Champerty. CHAMPERTY. Great word.
Okay. Cool. That's
For the script spelling bees heads out
that's
there.
good to know. Bye bye,
Yes.
Liz.
So I want to like pause on something and just kind of like, because you said this, but I really want to drive it home, is because I think this is the key to understanding why Thiel is different ideologically in the way that he exerts power, is that, there were so many ways that he could have done this. There were so many ways that he could have tried to, like, from behind the scenes, like soft power nudge things, either through money, through donors, through influence, through whatever.
I mean,
through
Gawker's
access.
owner Nick Denton was like a wealthy gay guy. They were of like the same set. They had a lot to talk about.
Right. So like, yeah,
he chose not to go that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And like pretty much everyone else does go that way, right? Like that is the playbook. That's how things are done. And for him to kind of like say, no, actually, I'm going to not just like, go this like insane route to shut it down. Like that will be, blockbuster lawsuit or whatever, but is actually like creating a precedent for future things as well, right?
Absolutely.
And so like that, I mean, I think that's like a key part, which is that like this lawsuit then creates a legal precedent in case any of this were to come up in any kind of remote way again. And suddenly now society has changed just a tiny bit, right?
Well, and I think even in just like definitely a way I would illustrate that is that it relates to this whole fucking argument we're having about the Supreme Court right now, which is that like part of what Peter Thiel did was that he looked at jurisprudence and he said judges are political actors and nobody treats them like that, and the way that you influence a political actor is you throw a lot of money at it, and I'm going to find a creative way. Or I have this person, he has like literally it was a guy who came up to him who like an associate of his who like had this whole scheme, and it's like this guy has a creative strategy for how to do this in a way that nobody's done before. And so like you're totally right, Liz. Like it's he developed like a blueprint in a really kind of creative way. And like I don't want to, I don't want to like get hung up on saying like, and so wow, he's such like an evil deliberate genius, but it is to just, to affirm what Liz is saying is that it's like it's what makes him like, stand out a bit from like a frankly pretty pallid cast of like, boring, fucking boring, ass billionaires and people.
Absolutely. I mean, I think what you just said is really important and maybe kind of gets us into like where I think we should go next, which is really getting into the like meat and potatoes of his philosophy and kind of intellectual outlook. Like what you said about him saying that judicial actors, that it's all about power, right? Like that really informs his worldview and the kind of like milieu that I guess we can say that he sort of tangentially belongs to. Is this idea that everything is reducible to, and maybe there, in a lot of ways this is correct, right? That that politics is reducible to struggle for power and who has power, and the way, whatever you do, whatever choices you make as an actor to influence politics has to take that into account, like you say, like paying the judge or whatever, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's like he, like. I guess to sort of, there's this New Yorker piece from 2011 by George Packer, and the opening of it is, I think, really, it's like the rest of the piece you can kind of, give or take because it's pretty dated. But basically, like it opens with Peter Thiel saying, like, he pulls an iPhone and says, "I don't consider this to be a technological breakthrough. Compare this with the Apollo space program." And it's because, like, he looks back and he thinks about like the way power gets wielded in the world now, and like where technological power is, and like where wealth is, and he sees that like people have been wielding power badly. That like why do we have iPhones? Literally, like why don't we have flying cars? And he believes like because that's his ultimate, like, that's part of his vision. At the Founders Fund, his venture capital firm, there's like a quote that gets passed around a lot that you sort of in a lot of their marketing material and is associated with them, that it's, like we were promised flying cars and we got like Facebook followers or something.
That they love saying that kind of shit.
Yeah, and to me, it's sort of like that is sort of like that's like that justification, this idea of investing in like a technological future that is going to be so rich that like we just need to get like strong men and strong, powerful people with a vision of it to take us there. And I think that really kind of sheds a lot of light about, like it explains how he approaches a lot of this stuff. And it also explains, I think, what makes him so popular among his set. Because if you're Mark Zuckerberg and this guy's investing in, like that's I mean, it's in a certain way, it sort of makes a lot of sense why Mark Zuckerberg thinks that he gets to run the world, because the investor who, probably single most made his reputation is a guy who believes that people like him are basically Jesus.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think that's totally true. I think what's interesting about it is like, I mean, all these guys, I mean, we can kind of say that Thiel sort of belongs to, he's a libertarian, or, like we said, he kind of like grew into libertarianism and then has now kind of moved in like an offshoot of what we could say libertarianism and libertarians are changing. And, the kind of like neo-reactionary movement that has, that kind of like started on the internet and elsewhere, like, I don't know, what would you say, like 2006, 2007 kind of started, that kind of like marries libertarianism and authoritarianism in like a very kind of weird way.
Well, I think that they also have like a bunch of it comes out of like England, and there's some specific figures like Nick Land,
Sure,
who I think like sort of get like get folded into all this.
I'm making the jacking off motion right now. Like in a dismissive way.
Yeah. I mean, the one thing I do think about like some of the origins with the libertarian stuff is that there is also like a kind of like Southern sort of like a lot of what Thiel says, and a lot of the people, like the sort of like white supremacist people that he would meet with and link up with in like 2018, come from like a version of that libertarian school in the South that's like, like a lot of which is just rooted in wanting to recreate like like planter society. And so I think that there is like a lot of, it should be pointed out that there's some like interesting synergies, as he might say.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I mean, that's always sort of been like the irony about a lot of libertarians is that they profess this goal of liberty, and for many people, or so they say, that means like very limited government or no government at all. And then you sort of like get to see how that has throughout the years really just been, I mean, ignored at essentially every opportunity by the major players in this. I mean, they've supported people like Pinochet. A lot of them flirt, or at least, or even full-fledged members of these far right groups, which certainly, their plans call for quite a lot of government intervention to quite a lot of people's lives. And I think that that Thiel is really indicative of that. Like, a lot of people call Thiel like a Nazi, or they call him a libertarian, and neither of those things are true. Like, he is this sort of like new breed of like futurist, like post-libertarians.
Liz, how do you see him how do you think Thiel thinks about power?
Well, I think there's a couple things. So I think that there's a really interesting quote from him in that same piece that you mentioned, where he says that women voting was a mistake or whatever.
Yeah.
And this is from 2009. So this is before, like I said, the kind of NRX stuff starts going on the internet, or this is right at the time when that's happening, but before Thiel links up with someone who I think we need to talk about, which is Curtis Yarvin or Mencius Moldbug. And he writes in this piece, I believe that politics is way too intense. That's why I'm a libertarian. Politics gets people angry, destroys relationships, and polarizes people's vision. The world is us versus them, good people versus the other. Politics is about interfering with other people's lives without their consent. Thus, I advocate focusing energy elsewhere onto peaceful projects that some consider utopian. So I think that there's a couple strands of thought here that are, like we said, making strange bedfellows and merging into this kind of new, not totally, I think, fully articulated vision.
Yeah.
But it's this idea of politics without politics, which is very much of our time, right? This idea that politics, what you call politics, has infected every area of life, and that has been overwhelming and really bad in general for society. Someone like Tucker Carlson echoes this a lot on his show when he talks about polarization and his fears of coming, civil war and all of that stuff. That's what kind of undergirds a lot of his thinking. I mean, well, I think that's true. But so there's that. And that kind of mirrors a lot of what you would see in the kind of German technocratic movement, right? Which is that you can have perfect seamless management of society that becomes apolitical, right? That is completely apolitical because it's just kind of a management philosophy. And so there's part of that. And then there's another part of Thiel that is, like you mentioned with the flying cars, that is that's the libertarian pleasure, I just want to feed the id, let's go. I want flying cars, Neverland. We're going to have whatever we want. This is what really informs a lot of utopian Silicon Valley culture, and particularly in San Francisco, where it's every office has playpens for fucking adults, and there's this childlike quality.
I think that is the piece of him that is it's the most banal thing about him. It's the least hard edged. But I think that's the thing about him that has really gotten him. It's what has allowed him to draw so much water. It's what other tech people see and are so jazzed about. And he's a collaborator in a lot of ways with Elon Musk, who is in SpaceX, which is funded in part by Thiel, and Musk and Thiel go back all the way to PayPal. And I think that they sort of you can look at Musk as similarly in this way, where it's just they're so interested in pushing forward this very hardware centric future vision that it other people they really, I mean, you guys live in San Francisco, and so it. People get fucking hard-ons for that in a really bad and disarming way.
Well, I think a lot of them have this vision or rather that they understand that technology is changing very rapidly, or at least it's well, I think they would call it advancing. I would disagree with them, but it's advancing us towards this sort of future where social relations will be different. Maybe the economy will need to be structured differently. It's this sort of technocratic vision of the future, and you see a lot of these founders and VCs and tech guys. I mean, every time there's an election cycle here in San Francisco, some absolutely depraved 42-year-old will be like, why don't we run the city like a dictatorship and have me in charge or something like that? Like it's.
Do you
it's
remember
done
the
like that all
SF
the
City
time.
ads?
No, what was that?
It was those like it was this initiative that Jack Dorsey launched in San Francisco like a decade ago, and it featured a bunch of like famous like tech executives in it, and it was
Yeah.
like, what if you had an app that could do this, and then it was like this whole initiative that they wanted to do to like weave Silicon Valley stuff into like prove that we could make like a smarter, cooler city, which is
I mean,
like
that's like a big part of what they say. Yeah.
yeah, and it's like hysterical because like American infrastructure is crumbling and shitty, and you go literally anywhere else in the fucking world, and it's like, oh wow, they can have like a train that runs and gets.
Well,
what's going.
yeah, but also, I mean, it's important to note that like the tech companies have their hands in like all infrastructure projects in the Bay Area. I mean, like Facebook was like working on a fucking commuter tunnel from like God knows where. I can't even remember how fucking far north it went, like Sacramento to Facebook HQ before all this shit happened. Oh yeah. And it was,
they're basically rebuilding. I mean,
they're rebuilding San Francisco. Absolutely.
Oh,
mean,
no,
the-
100%. But
Yeah.
like, but what I'm saying is that like a lot of these guys have these visions of the future that are like are pretty ill thought out, or are thought out in terms of like how can we make American capitalism better for Facebook or better for whatever. Whereas I think Thiel sort of departs from that and has like what Liz was saying is like this will to power for himself to actually have a lot of power. And I think that like, especially with his it's more than flirtations, but like his associations with Moldbug is he's actually really looking for the answer to that, for like what things will be like.
And this is where I think we can mention some of the like, like stranger, more esoteric Thiel things, like the fucking, like the blood shit. Like where it's like, because
which
ultimately,
by the way, doesn't work.
Yeah, no, of course, but it's the like the stories that it has been reported that Peter Thiel is invested in and is very interested in and has had performed procedures where he is injected with the blood of younger people because the like thinking, I guess the logic is that it makes you live longer. Total bullshit. But the as in that science is bullshit. Not that story's bullshit. That story is very true. And you can take it to the bank on that. But but I think one of the things with him is that it's like he believes that he needs like you need like Ubermenschen type people who have like live longer, who do that, who are the ones who are equipped to wield this power and who can shepherd the change into our like Jetsons ass future, whatever.
He is like, to you or I, you might think like, oh, well, that sounds insane. Like he could just look it up on the internet to see that like, yeah, the blood of a younger person does not make you like live longer or anything like that. Although I still think that's how Keith Richards cured himself of heroin addiction. But he's also invested on something that Liz and I have talked about on the show before, the Seasteading Institute and Humanity Plus. And I believe Alcor Institute. It's the life extension thing that Jeffrey Epstein was talking about freezing his penis and his head with. In fact, Epstein was involved with a lot of these organizations, Humanity Plus in particular, which of course Patry Friedman, Milton Friedman's grandson, was on the board of, and who got really mad at me for mentioning that on the internet.
Because he's a fucking baby.
I think that there's also with Thiel, like a real, like he's never left childhood, basically. Like he named his companies and a lot of the stuff after like Lord of the Rings references. There was that Star Wars reference that you brought up earlier, but also the flying cars stuff and like the idea of like what a breakthrough is and everything. On the one hand, like he's a smart guy and he knows that like, yeah, it's like Facebook is like just basically like a giant ad marketplace and that's what makes stuff worth $1 billion and that's how I get rich. But he still talks about like fucking flying cars, which are not happening. So like what accounts for the disparity there? And I think it's because like the story that he tells himself about like this really special future, on some level he has to just know is like that's just a story. Like that's not going to happen. And instead what we have is like this world of scarce resources and you've just got to dominate to survive. And so I think that like the future bullshit, it is just like, it's all like bullshit because on some level, like as evidenced by his actual actions, he believes that, he has the secret knowledge that it's really dog eat dog and only a will to power is what lasts in the end.
Well, I think like, I mentioned previously, like there's like a couple strands that he kind of marries in his thinking, and I think that what we're getting at is actually what I think is the third strand, which is really important, which is that kind of will to power or like authoritarian view. And like we mentioned, like for someone who calls himself a libertarian to then have a kind of authoritarian or sort of neo-monarchist, if you want, view about how states should be structured, that sounds like completely incoherent or incompatible, right? And this is where I kind of want to bring in Moldbug, because I do think this is important for people to understand. Like, Mencius Moldbug, if you guys don't know who he is, his name is Curtis that's his real name, Curtis Yarvin, and he's a tech guy. He started blogging under the name Moldbug, I think in like 2006 or 2007. I can't remember when. Sorry. It was called like what was his blog? Unqualified Reservations, UR, I think. That's what it's called. Anyway.
It was 207.
Yeah, and okay. And he was kind of like associated with what we called that like neo-reactionary NRX, kind of named that.
The Dark Enlightenment.
Yes, the Dark Enlightenment. Yeah.
Will never not
and
be
he,
funny to me.
he kind of was blogging all this stuff. He is a kind of pretty famous, or like one of his most famous ideas was something called the Cathedral, which is pretty much reiterating actually a pretty basic, fundamental Frankfurt School theory of how different ideological structures influence the world. But to his credit, the Cathedral is a very memorable sort of concise way of understanding those things. So, I'll give him that. But anyway, something to understand about like his view, and he's he's close with Thiel. I don't know how much this is reported or their relationship is reported, but I know that, Thiel invests heavily in Yarvin's tech project, which is called Urbit, and that, it was reported that he was kind of mentoring or advising Thiel as early as like 2015, I think, 2016. But so the idea that these guys take and the way they kind of marry libertarianism and authoritarianism is it's a bit paradoxical, but what Moldbug says is that basically when you split sovereignty among like three branches of government, right? Like in a liberal democracy, it's the judiciary, the executive, and the legislature. That when you do that, like theoretically you're doing that in the name of a more democratic functioning government, right?
Checks and balances.
Exactly. But in actual existing reality, he says that by actually splitting sovereignty, what you're doing is by nature expanding the state, which infringes on liberty, right? For a libertarian. And so paradoxically, a libertarian and a libertarian society actually requires a sole sovereign who oversees what Moldbug has kind of laid out as a very efficient and minimal but like very highly centralized bureaucracy.
And if, I think one thing that's kind of interesting, to bring up, my roommate was reading a book the other day, and he pointed out to me that for most of the 19th century, the like federal government only employed like I don't even think like 1,000 people. Like, I think like part of this whole like vision, like the way in which like Mencius Moldbug and like the specific like sort of historical references that I guess that they're sort of like he's kind of like culling from, and this like imagined past or what, I guess imagined like society or whatever, and the past that he points to justify it is one that's just like, it's like fucking like bedlam, and is one in which people, you need people like Peter Thiel to survive. You need people like the Big Lebowski to get through, because that's really, that.
Yeah, it kind of comes from this like, I think it's called Cameralism, which is like an early, it was like kind of a weird competitor to mercantilism, right? Where it was like, individual city-states, it was like kind of like an 18th century, maybe early 19th century, I guess German science, you could call it. But it was the science of bureaucracy, and it basically like developed what we know as the modern bureaucracy. And it used like early statistical models and basically like population numbers and data that they could get to create like a very centralized economy within like a landlocked state. And this is like important. I know this sounds like maybe this is boring for people listening and this sounds like a lecture or something, but this is really important to understand when we're trying to understand kind of where modern conservative thought is going, because this is in contrast to what else was going on at the time, which is a mercantilist society, which required, trade and importing raw materials from like a colonial periphery, right? And so, what these guys envision is this kind of highly efficient, enclosed, what we would now call a city-state, I would think, that has a very centralized economy that is very efficient, run by very efficient bureaucrats, and with a central, all-powerful executive or sovereign.
Well, a big question I've always had when thinking about Palantir is like, well, Peter Thiel is this famous libertarian. Why does he have this company that is so classically invasive on people's civil liberties? And put in this context, it makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why I wanted to bring up this this idea of this like non-political technocracy, right? And that through efficient management structure and basically a will to power to get it and impose it, that we can not only free everyone from the burden of politics in their life and all this polarizing bullshit, but we can also free up our social and economic capacity to then realize this insane future that we haven't yet been able to achieve because of so much inefficient waste and political nonsense that we have to deal with.
Which is like a straight line to the other person that haunts Liz's nightmares, which is Jeff Bezos. Because if there's anybody in the world that you can point to who has like done this, it's him. Because that's what Amazon is basically. I mean, you ever want proof that central planning works? Look at fucking Amazon. Like it's functionally
or the Soviet Union.
Yeah, I mean
for a period. Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Correct.
I'm a big fan of central planning.
I'm a big fan of Brezhnev.
No, I'm there's no disputing it. But it's, I mean, and this is, part of what's so impressive. I mean, in Amazon's case, like, because of the way, like, the American economy is structured, lowering, like, getting to the lowest possible price for the greatest amount of convenience, is like, the thing that Amazon was like architected to do. And it's like Jeff Bezos, like, upended American society to make that possible. And it doesn't even, it doesn't even have to, and he's not even like, accounting for like a majority of commerce or anything. It's not like he runs the world. But it's like he's gotten so much of it that even the slice that he's taken off has made him literally the richest person in like centuries. And so to me, that's kind of like, it's sort of like the Peter Thiel stuff is like, we do kind of already live in a world that is made by people who act in the way that he thinks they should act. Like, even if like Jeff Bezos probably wouldn't call himself like a fellow traveler with Peter Thiel, it is kind of interesting how it does feel like he is like the fantasy creature that Thiel and Moldbug, these people get to.
Exactly. That's the funny thing about this is that like Thiel, I think, probably imagines himself to be that person. Moldbug certainly doesn't imagine, I believe, Jeff Bezos to be that person, but Bezos sort of is that person. And I think in the future, like obviously, things are the way they are right now, but I think in the future, as like anybody listening to this show or really anybody anywhere should realize, like things are going to get worse in ways that we can't even imagine, baby. Like things are going to get so much weirder. It's like, Amazon has really like this sort of Amazonification of the economy has not been going on for that long. I mean, imagine in 30, 40 years. We're going to start seeing a figure like this who actually like, is thinking it out and has like, or it could be Bezos himself, or it could be Thiel with this life extension stuff works out.
Well, I think we're already like living in it. I mean, the reason I brought up the like, with the cameralist idea about it being these like with these hard borders, that it had to be this central closed state, is like people have to understand that for a big part of conservative thought that wants to, chop up the global supply chains and bring manufacturing back, like that is one of the animating reasons for, that there's an economic purpose there, right? For closing out the state and walling off the state away from kind of global supply chains. And this is an ideology that undergirds it. And I think people tend to overlook that. But like another way you can see this like animating a lot of our political talks right now is like, I mean, someone just published a book that's like the left case for breaking up the United States, which I just like, I saw an interview with whoever this asshole is in The Nation. And I was reading some of it and I just like couldn't believe how stupid. I mean, and this is like a lot of people.
Into like sectors or zones or something?
Yeah. So, and that shit that you've heard before with the like Cascadia and California and, whatever. And I don't know, I guess no one cares about the South, but whatever. We know what would happen to the South, I guess, but no one seems to care.
Yes, where the majority of black people in the country live.
So it's like you can conduct people's war better if you have revolutionary base areas. That's why they want to do it.
Possibly. I really want to break this down for people. I mean, I've heard people that I, really respect say that they think this is a better way to govern because it's smaller, and they bring up the EU, and they bring up that as an example, which, I'm not going to get into how. Yeah, I'm not going to get into how
Nazi project.
Just break how the EU is actually a really terrible project. But, they bring that up as a governing example of like, okay, it would be so much easier if we just break up the United States because it's become too big to govern, or it's inefficient from the right perspective, or it's anti-democratic from the liberal perspective, whatever they think that means. And so you get all these converging all these converging arguments for the same thing, which is let's break up the United States into individual governed city-states. Now, what gets mistaken here, I just want to I'm just going to say all this shit because we're talking about it. Like what people forget when they say all this, you have all these little city-states that, would probably be, that would be run by Bezos and Zuckerberg and Thiel and whoever, right? Not you and me, and it wouldn't be democratic in any way that you're thinking of. But is that like the US dollar and the hegemony of the US dollar would not go away. And so actually what you would then see would be, much like the EU, is a centralized executive under the central bank. And now you're seeing an executive that would be the Fed, with which is one of the least transparent organizations or like institutions in the fucking government. Like if you think you can't understand how the executive works, you have absolutely no idea how the Fed works.
This is a pro audit the Fed podcast.
Absolutely.
No,
But
it really is.
now you have like both liberals and conservatives arguing from different angles to break up the United States in order to give the central bank basically full executive authority. And like now what we're looking at is actually a future that really does resemble what Thiel thinks, what Thiel wants, which is a highly efficient, basically fully automated luxury state capitalism.
And and the scary thing about Thiel is that, like, as he kind of repeatedly demonstrates or views himself to be, we haven't talked a lot about like his role in like Trump and right wing politics, and I actually think that's kind of good because in a lot of ways that's where he's made the least progress and has had the least success.
He pulled out too.
Exactly. He's not like backing Trump anymore, even if he is backing like intellectually like conservative and right wing.
Well, that's because real accelerationists are backing Biden.
Yeah, so I do think
it's true actually
is that here I guess maybe I can maybe close it out with this. This is an example that I was thinking of earlier. It's sort of, like why did Peter Thiel sue Gawker then? Like what was actually the reason? Like if it wasn't the gay thing, because it's just like it doesn't make sense, it's not real. And it turned, when you think about it, it's because of one of the places where Peter Thiel failed. And that was his first project after PayPal, which is he launched a hedge fund called Clarium Capital. And Clarium Capital at its peak managed like several $1 billion worth of other people's money.
I think like $9 billion. Yeah.
And with the crash in '07 into '08, hedge funds are supposed to be prepared. Like, the reason that in a recession they don't completely like disappear is that they're supposed to like take positions that can withstand any set of conditions, or that can, ultimately will vindicate and reward their opinion, the good ones anyway. And Clarium Capital's portfolio shrank down because of its losses. Everybody started pulling out their money, and it failed. And one of the chroniclers in humiliating, delightful, and entertaining fashion of Clarium Capital's demise was Valleywag. And, Peter Thiel, like every other asshole of his nature, is incredibly thin-skinned. And, like simply being the journalists who are pointing out and saying like, hey, there's a fire here. Hey, look at this asshole. He's setting his money on fucking fire here. Like he punished them for it in a really grotesque and extreme way many years after the fact. But like, those are the kinds of people that we're dealing with. He's as good an example of what the enemy is and how effective they can be as any of them.
Which, by the way, we should say, Peter, if you're listening, hello.
Hello. Hey, Peter. Peter, I am absolutely, and I know I say this a lot on this podcast, but I really mean it. I am absolutely willing to betray every single thing that I purport to believe in at the drop of a hat if you either frighten me or pay me.
You should pay him, because then maybe we can get some money.
Yeah. Give your money to Belden.
The Belden program needs to seed investment.
Yeah,
Well,
exactly.
that
would be pretty funny. Just like filming, like getting you in front of pitching the Belden program to Peter Thiel.
But like on Shark Tank.
Yeah, exactly. The Belden program on Shark Tank. How do we get the Belden program on Shark Tank?
Well, I'm sure that you and I could figure it out through the our local organizations.
The Shark Tank. Oh yeah, sure. I love a Shark Tank. Expensive, no?
Thiel pays people not to go to college. I know he pays like $100,000 if you don't go to college. I'm just wondering if that works retroactively. And in case it does, then I'm more than willing to settle any lawsuit that comes up from this podcast by just willing to drop my demanding he pay me for that.
I think that's a good idea.
Well, what have we learned today?
I don't know, but we sure talked about a lot of things.
Yeah, we really
Noah,
did.
it's always a pleasure to have you on.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
I can't say this while we're recording, but I do know a former Thiel fellow.
Wait, we're still recording.
What? Oh, fuck. No, I don't want to know. I do know what normal. He seems like a normal, semi-well-adjusted enough guy.
Wait, by Thiel fellow, do you mean like a 20 to 24-year-old twink at
Oh
Twin
my
Peaks
God.
Bar in San Francisco? Or by Thiel fellow, you mean someone who actually did the fellowship?
Porque no los dos.
That's actually funny. That's funny that you say that. Because I was just listening to Mencius Moldbug on a Nazi podcast like an hour before we started this. And the guy was like, I can't remember what it was, but it was like, he was talking about like Moldbug was talking about like Jewish and WASP influences on foreign policy. And the guy's like the host, who described himself as a professional anti-Semite, which means he's probably not making that much money, said, "Por qué no los dos?" I don't know how to fucking speak Spanish. Said, "Por qué no los dos?" And I was like, damn, that's crazy. That guy speaks Spanish. And I was like, well, I guess it kind of makes sense. But it was one of the... I will say this.
Anti-Semitism in Spanish, well-known opposite.
I will say this.
I wouldn't... That's, a real inquisition you're making there.
No, but I mean the fact that he was like very much an American nationalist or whatever. Yeah. But one thing that I found funny was Moldbug talks very confidently about a great number of things, but he was unless I'm out of my fucking mind, totally wrong about Belgium had a position of neutrality in World War I as they did in World War II. And Moldbug says that it was okay for the Germans to kill and hang Belgians, both civilians and frankateurs, the Belgian guerrillas, I don't know how to pronounce it, but the Belgian guerrillas who were fighting against the Germans because they were breaking the laws of war. But they invaded a neutral fucking country. It's totally bankrupt. He says it confidently, but no, he's incorrect. He's incorrect. And that just don't get me started.
Wow. I had no idea there were guerrillas in Belgium.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they didn't win, but I guess they won the war. All right, let's wrap this fucking thing up. Should we just sign off from here?
Yeah, let's do it.
I'm down to do it. I don't know what's the rhythm of this.
How do we do this? Wait, so how does it... Okay, wait. It goes like this. I'm Liz.
I'm Brace. And this is featuring...
Noah Kulwin.
And of course, produced by...
Young Chomsky. That's how he talks.
And this is the
TrueAnon podcast.
And we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey